Good evening. This is a meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Tonight, we have had the following items postponed. It is the first 5 items on the agenda. It's Office Park LLC, Putnam 600 Acquisition LLC, and 585 West Putnam LLC. Then it's Office Park LLC, Office Park LLC, Office Park LLC, 585 West Putnam LLC, and Putnam 600 LLC. The 6th item has also been postponed, and that's 500 WPA and Putnam 600 Acquisition LLC. The 7th item has also been postponed, and that was Greenwich Hospital and RFK Enterprises. We're going to start with the 8th item tonight, which is GFC Havemeyer, record owners in Chabad Lubavitch of Greenwich, and we're going to open that HO application for the historic overlay at the same time that we're going to open the GFC Havemeyer and Chabad Lubavitch site plan, which is item number 9, for a final site plan as well as a special permit. In so doing, I would like to note that both Mr. Yeski and Mrs. Goss are seated tonight, are the seated alternates this evening on these applications. Okay. Mr. Hegney.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. For the record, Tom Hegney on behalf of the applicants. We were before you at the November 8th meeting and presented the plans to you at that time. We also reviewed the history of this site, which has an armory which was constructed in 1911. I think is consensus of everyone on all sides that this is a building worthy of preservation. We also went over the plans that you had previously approved in 2007, which actually only retained the facade on Mason Street of that of the armory itself. The rest of the building and the shed were to be removed, and that was about a 27,000 square foot development, residential development. Last year, the Historic District Commission saw a plan that didn't quite make its way to you, and that was for a 28,000 square foot development. It included retaining the office space of approximately 6,200 square feet at the armory, but did involve the complete removal of the shed. Our plan that we submitted to you, and it was heard last month, included retaining the 6,200 square feet of the armory office space and the south wall of the shed. It also involved reconstructing the westerly wall of the shed in roughly in the same configuration that it currently is. At that meeting, the commission asked us to review whether the 91 spaces could be allocated in a different fashion. These are the 91 spaces that are part of the approval for the financial center on Fawcett Place and the armory itself, and whether we could provide for this parking while retaining the shed. And so we've had a number of meetings with staff. We've developed several schemes. The most recent one we're sharing with you this evening. In looking at the 91 spaces, we found that not only are they committed based on a site plan approval by this commission, but they are also committed as a result of long-term leases that have been entered into by the owner of the property, which perhaps could be dealt with, but more difficultly, the financing for these properties also requires the maintenance of the 91 spaces. As is the case with all of the spaces in the shed, which are currently 33 spaces, they are all designated for a specific tenant. And that's how we would proceed with the plans that we have before you this evening, that each of those 91 spaces would be specifically allocated to a specific tenant. So each space would be marked so there wouldn't be a confusion as to what spaces are available for what tenant. The plan that we have before you this evening calls for the reconstruction of the westerly wall and also of the roof of the shed, so that the shed roof would be essentially what you see there now. It would allow for separate parking areas for the armory, offices for the financial center, and for the synagogue, most importantly for the preschool. You also asked us to look at reducing the square footage and the overall height of the synagogue as proposed, and we have that to present to you this evening. With that, I'm going to ask Rich Granoff, our architect, to walk through the plans with you that are part of this revision. Thank you.
Let me grab this. Good evening, Rich Granoff, Granoff Architects, representing my clients, Chabad of Greenwich. So as Mr. Hegney teed up, we listened carefully to your comments from last time, and there's two main features of the redesign that I'm going to present to you. The first is the reduction in scale and setbacks on the proposed synagogue building, and the second is a proposed major reconstruction of the drill shed rather than a partial reconstruction from the last time. So I'm going to walk you through a series of what is going to be the previous proposal. Whoops. Yep. So the previous proposal, basically, this is what we had. We had a setback only on the Mason Street side, but on the Havemeyer side, the building was on the property line. So the new proposal actually slides the building back 8 feet on the on that side of the building, and another three additional feet. So the building now is set back 8 feet and 8 feet from both of the streets. And just as importantly, there is now a planting buffer completely lining both streets, and these buffers are 8 feet, goes to 12 feet here, 8 feet here. It's pretty big at the corner, about 16 feet, and then it's the planting buffer is 8 feet along Mason Street on this side there. Going back to the mass of the building, we actually reduced the overall height of the building by 3 feet. In the before rendering, if you look at the amount of glass for the synagogue space that was protruding above here compared to this amount of glass that you see there, sorry. It's quite obvious that we reduced the height of the building here. If you look at this corner of the building on the previous proposal, you see how much further up it protrudes than the adjacent Weber Gallery building. And you look at it here, it's actually quite obvious that that was reduced by about 4 feet, that element there. And going over to this side of the building, you can see how the previous proposal was up to the height of one of the parapets in the existing armory building. And what's interesting about this view here is now that we're adding the roof and rebuilding the clear story lights, those become a kind of a major visual factor of what you see when you're heading south on Mason Street there. So to reinforce what I said, the building is smaller, it's less volume, it's 3 feet lower, and it's set back on both street facades.
Mr. Granoff, what's the total height of the building as proposed?
I think we're down to 36 feet and change.
Thank you.
It was 39 and change. We were just below the 40 foot. Even though we're allowed to go higher in HO, the previous proposal we were at the 40. This was a 40-foot, 39.11, and we took 3 feet off. So we're 3.5 feet off. So we're 36 and change.
38.6 that Pat has there is an old number.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how much did you decrease the size, the square footage?
The square footage actually is down about 400 square feet. It's actually, the building itself is actually more. When we took the the second deck off the garage, which I'm going to show you in a second, it allowed us to lose some staircases that we were not counting as FAR that now we have to count as FAR in the building. I'll point that out to you when I get to the plan so to make that clear. So it's really closer to 1,000 square feet of building, but we had to add back in a fire stair for the parking garage. And again, I'll explain that when we get to the plans. Okay, so as I explained, we only had a setback on this street here, and now on Havemeyer, where this floor plan, I think, is pretty clear in this planted buffer on both sides. And also, because the building moved back 3 feet on this side, what we're calling the public, the gathering space in front of the building got bigger as a result of that change. Okay, so this is a view, obviously looking north on Mason. The previous proposal, we were keeping the south wall, and this is the only wall that is structurally feasible to keep in the drill shed. And one point that was not really communicated well at the last hearing was we've had structural analysis, in-depth structural analysis done on the drill shed. And it's in terrible shape. It's literally falling apart. And we talked to Helen Yitkin, who currently owns it, about it, and she said, the roof's falling down, the structure is rusted. It's really in terrible shape. It's been a parking garage for 40 years. So the idea of restoring it is virtually impossible, and it doesn't comply with current earthquake codes and egress and ventilation. So there's a lot of different ways that the existing structure is not restorable and non-compliant with codes. That said, we're proposing to build a restoration of the drill shed. So this southern wall will be restored, and it's in good structural shape. It's already been underpinned a few years back. And before, we were removing the roof completely off the drill shed, and we were proposing to rebuild the western wall, which I'll show you in a second, and a piece of the roof. This is really a fire stair. In the revised proposal, we are rebuilding the entire roof and the clear story light, which I also showed you in this view here. So, and it's an important feature of the historic structure.
Mr. Granum, just so I don't forget to ask you, can you please submit that structural analysis? It would be good to have that for the record. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think this is a very, very important view to show the lengths that we're going and the costs that we're expending to restore or a replica of the drill shed. This is an aerial view. No one would really see this view other than a drone or a bird. But I think it, again, shows what I just stated, which is before we were building basically a two-level parking garage with a roof deck that would have been a playground that we are no longer doing. So we're no longer proposing this. We are proposing this. And within this is 2 levels of parking under the rebuilt roof area here. This is a view of what we're proposing from the western wall. So this is one of the important features, this crenellated stepping wall of the armory structure and of typical armory structures that were built in the early 20th century. And what's interesting about what we're showing here is these are openings, arched openings, that actually allow ventilation into the garage, which is required by code, and also negate the FAR, which is a technicality. But ironically or not, there were 2 arched openings that are filled in on the current, that facade. And my firm was hired about 10 years ago on the south side to enlarge an arched opening and create it. So there's a history in this structure of filling in openings, widening them, and that's not uncommon for historic structures, that they get renovated for functional reasons over the years. And this has been a parking garage for 40 years. Okay, so this is a before and after on the roof plan. And as I said, at the last presentation, we showed this was a two-story parking structure with a roof, a flat roof above it, and this was a large playground structure. And we were not using the roof of the synagogue other than for mechanical equipment. The current proposal is the roof of the drill shed, as I've previously explained. And we now have stairs and elevator that are coming up to this rooftop playground. And this is a railing here. We're not letting kids get close to the edge up here. There's mechanical equipment, and screening back here. So this is the current proposal on the roof plan of the building, which complies with all of the sections of the zoning ordinance on that. And now back to your question from before. In order to use the rooftop for playground, the fire code is very specific about requiring an additional means of egress for children only in the event of a fire. And the logic is if they're sharing an egress with adults, that they might get trampled on the way down. So there's a staircase here that we added that is solely dedicated to the roof for children to egress off of, and that would be a controlled access on that. And so those were all the before and afters. This is a series I'm going to take you through of just revised, updated renderings, which we pulled off in the last 24 hours. And I think this, shows the building in context nicely. I'm going to say something offline, even though I know there's a lot of opposition to this project, and for all kinds of reasons. And having been an architect in Greenwich for 30 years, I really feel this corner deserves an important building, a civic building, if you will. And I also feel that it's the right place for a house of worship, rather than in a backcountry lane or on top of single-family homes. Thank you. So this shows it in context here. It also shows nicely, I think, how it fits in, and it's purposely not an all-brick building, which we felt would be in conflict with the all-brick building here and the all-brick building here. There are brick accents, and I also think it shows the scale is significantly smaller than the fire station, which was completed last year. This is a view looking south from Mason Street. Firehouse in the foreground, and we're consciously using a yellower stone than the white limestone of the firehouse. Dead on the corner, now showing landscaping on both sides. As I said, 8 or 12 feet here, 16 at the corner, 8 feet along here. These low walls would be bench height for people to sit. Basically from the firehouse, looking straight across. And the view from Greenwich Avenue, showing the Weber Gallery in the foreground, building. Looking north on Mason Street, I think this demonstrates how the scale fits in to the context. That, especially from this view, that our building is secondary to the armory and also secondary to the firehouse back. And a similar view. And this is the one that I showed before of the aerial from this side. Also shows the scale of the former town hall building, which is 5 stories tall there, 4 stories over here, 3 stories, 3 stories, 3 stories. Okay, so with that, I can turn it over to Bernie Adler. Thanks. Thanks, Rich.
Yes, Mr. Grano? I just want to make sure I understand. The southern wall is to be restored.
The southern wall is to be rebuilt. No, sorry. Southern wall is existing, restored. Northern wall is to be rebuilt.
Okay. Then
And west, thanks.
the west wall is being restored or rebuilt?
Rebuilt. We wanted to restore that wall, and we were advised that it would be a very difficult feat of engineering, therefore rebuilding it, matching the brick.
The north wall will be removed completely.
No, the north wall would be similar to the west wall in that it would be a brick wall with arches in it.
Removed and rebuilt.
Removed and rebuilt, yes.
And the roof as well, removed and rebuilt.
Correct. So the wall that is being restored is the south wall, and the west and north walls and the roof are being replicated.
And the
And-
east facade?
East facade is remaining. It's against the Armory building itself.
Okay.
Okay. So
And you've had that structurally assessed?
Yes. And as part of analyzing the Armory, the office building, which we're going to excavate adjacent to and underpin, we had significant studies done on that, yes. And a significant cost of the project is going to go to underpinning and keeping existing walls and making sure everything's done carefully.
Will that office be able to function during construction? Like, in other
Yes.
words, so you can shore it up such
Yes.
that the building can still function?
Absolutely. That was important to the seller because they work there.
In 2007, we were told that facade, what were they going to do again? We were told it wasn't structurally sound at the time, but
Well, that was a different.
Yeah, the difference with that plan compared to what we're doing, they were just going to retain the wall
Right.
on Mason Street.
And that's why they had
And
this-
the commission went to great lengths within its decision letter
yes, I
to
remember that.
say that that wall has to stay, and if that wall didn't stay, then the whole project approval was void. But that was because it was a Hollywood facade. There was nothing
Right.
behind it.
okay.
Here, we're looking to save that 6,200 square feet completely. And,
Gotcha.
And that's, as Rich said, that's where the seller's office is, so
Okay.
they have an interest in us keeping it.
Can you, Mr. Hagnick, please, can you tell me more about the seller's office? So the Nitkin family has their offices for another business in the same building?
Yes. Yeah, they're in the Armory now.
And about how much space do they take in the Armory?
I would say it's about 3,000 square feet. They have the whole second floor of the structure.
So that's a non-religious institution use within the
Right.
project?
That's true. Yeah,
Okay.
the Chabad is looking just to have the new structure as part of its activities and programs and services. The existing Armory building would be kept as it currently is, as office space.
Thank you.
And the project, the 2007, what was the use of the project? What was it?
It was going to be
No.
townhouses or condos.
And the parking requirement for that sort of a project is
They had
roughly?
They had less parking provided, however, is that one?
It was all underground.
It was all underground, yeah. It was all going to be underground.
But order of magnitude, how many units are we talking about again?
I think it was 9 units that were there, and they had a total of 27 parking spaces.
Plus the 91.
Yeah. And the 91 is the given that we've had to deal with
Oh,
as
they
we've gone
were
forward.
actually providing the same amount of total parking, just pointing that out. 91 and 27,
Yeah, pretty
It's
close.
91 and
Yeah.
36,
right.
so you need additional parking.
We have 91 spaces with the lower level and the upper level deck, and then we have 31 on the
31.
at grade. Yeah, actually, yeah.
Okay.
Was there a traffic study done on the prior project?
I don't know.
I don't remember. I'm not sure
No.
because,
Mr. Adler says yes,
Okay.
probably because he was the one who did the traffic study.
But there were 9 units?
I think it was 10, but let's settle on 9.
So the traffic, extra traffic was negligible, 9 units, right?
9 units doesn't create an awful lot of traffic, and that's why when we looked to design the synagogue, we knew we needed both a traffic and a parking study, which was why we presented that as part of the
It
application.
just doesn't sound like similar projects. The parking is significantly less, the traffic is non-existent. So, you keep referring back to that project, but very different uses, different buildings.
Well,
Very, very different buildings.
Yes, except that you're ending up with more of a retained historic structure. And
We appreciate. It's been a struggle to get there, so.
And your regulations do encourage that, and
Yes,
we
thank you.
appreciate that. And we're looking to reconstruct a significant portion that the public has expressed an interest in, and the Historic District Commission expressed an interest in. It's true that the traffic patterns would be different, but we have prepared a traffic study that indicates that there's no change in the level of service in any of the intersections surrounding the property as a result of the construction of the synagogue and its uses.
Which we're going to get into, right? The
I
traffic.
was just about to introduce Mr. Adler to do
So
that.
what's the total FAR?
27,124, I believe.
So the FAR, the ratio?
0.86.
0.86.
0.86.
Okay.
The other was 0.88.
Okay.
No, not much different. I'm still amazed. I'd love to see, I don't know, I guess you can't do 3D. I don't know, you say the building's smaller, but not really. You say you got it by,
Feet lower,
right,
which is significant.
And some of the other,
Not a floor, no.
not a floor.
It's a three-story building. Could you use the microphone?
Hey,
It's not a floor.
I would think that was me.
Oh, him, okay.
No, it's
Thank
still-
you. It wasn't me.
It's still a three-story building. In essence, we took 1 foot out of each of the 3 floors, which we didn't really want to do, but we heard the comments that, try to make the building smaller and lower in scale. And pushing it back from the street, we also thought was a pretty significant gesture, and adding landscaping on the street. So we're trying to listen and respond within the context of...
But it ends up very similar size building, materially the same.
Which would feel smaller, appear small.
and provide more of a setback off both Mason Street
How much was
and
that, how much
Havemeyer.
more setback again?
We
Off
have
Mason?
3 additional feet. It was 5 feet back from the property line, and now it's 8 feet.
What's in that What's in that setback? Is it grass or what?
Yeah, it's landscape. Mr. Gurdon, can you use the microphone, please?
Oh, good, it wasn't me.
That's me, I'm sorry. Let's see.
I got it.
Al shows it here. So what you're looking at is, these are planting beds. This is an 8-foot deep planting bed. This is a bench seat with greenery and, trees and shrubs and grasses, 8 feet
Mr.
deep.
Hegney, you make a better door than a window. ahead.
Maybe I have a different view as well. Let me see what I got. This one shows it pretty well. They're planting beds. So the building facade at this point here is 8 feet back from the setback line. There's a sidewalk in addition, obviously. So these are 8-foot deep planting beds with, and the brick walls are benches in
How high
essence.
is the armory compared to your maximum height?
It's interesting question. There's different heights.
Yeah,
Let's see if
that
I can
tower
show it.
thing, yeah, right. Do you count that as height? That's not really height.
Well,
it's the parapet.
so, we already, your zoning regulations tell us how we measure buildings, and we exclude parapets and other things. So what we're trying to do is align this, this datum, if you will, of the second floor, we aligned with our second floor. And to me, that does the job architecturally, of getting the scales down. Now, so the height of the armory overall would be to the top of the clear story, right? If you count that as a bulkhead, that doesn't count. And similarly, which is actually an interesting paradigm here now, that we have this kind of glass clear story light, and the drill shed has a glass clear story light. That wasn't one of the original intentions, but it's coming into play now.
But how about the section on the right there that's on Havemeyer? Ahead of the, right
Yep.
there.
So-
To the armory.
Well, so this bulkhead, which is an elevator bulkhead right here, aligns with that elevator bulkhead. That's what that is. So you have kind of a similar things going on in these buildings, maybe not for the same reasons, because in 1911 there wasn't a zoning ordinance, but
Well, I'm not an architect, but I don't think that quite aligns. Nick, I mean, you're talking about the part along Havemeyer having a similar feel to the elevator tower and the armory?
well, there's different pieces. This is the elevator bulkhead of our
Right.
building.
What about the thing in the front? Right.
So this is lower down intentionally. This is at our 36.5 feet, our maximum height there, which aligns with the top of the building there. And again, another elevator bulkhead is in the back. There's 2 elevators in the building.
What's in that section, other than the elevator, the front section?
Here,
You're right.
that's a 3rd floor. There's that's a teen center on the 3rd floor. What it is?
What's in the clear space, the round,
That's the sanctuary. That's the main.
top of it, right? Okay.
Yep. It's the main sanctuary.
Got it.
Make sure you understand.
Yeah, I done my part, so I'll hang on.
There you go. So that's the 2nd floor plan. There. So, and I go up to the 3rd floor. The space you were just talking about, this is the elevator bulkhead I pointed out, the stairs, and this is space, usable space for the teen center on the 3rd floor.
Mr. Granoff, question about access. The floor plans, or the building itself as proposed, are really actually not connected to the armory anymore. It's all the ramps and/or driveways separate the building from the armory.
Yeah, they never were connected.
Okay. The first one, you actually could walk from, I think it was the 3rd floor out to the playground, though, right?
Yeah, there is no playground on the 3rd floor anymore, but the 2nd floor plan, which I'm going to pull up right here. So here, the ramp comes up from Havemeyer and ends up here, and then it punctures the drill shed reconstructed wall here. So there is a connection from the parking area to the 2nd floor parking in the drill shed there. And that was the same, but it was a little more tricked out before when we didn't have the roof and we had another deck on top of that, which I can point out.
Now, go back to that.
This one here shows it. So before, we had this level of parking, a 2nd level of parking, and then a deck on top of that. We no longer have this deck. This deck has been replaced by the roof. And as I said, now the playground's up on top of this piece here.
Can you go back to the roof plan? I think it's that 3rd slide back.
Yeah, there's a before and
That-
after on the roof plan.
Nope.
Not that one. Let's see. Let's try this. This one.
Okay, so on the bottom was the previous proposal.
And as
You
I
could
said,
actually-
so the previous proposal had a 3rd level.
Which was the playground.
It was the playground. It wasn't a parking deck. It was the roof of the parking deck below.
Right, and that was
we
actually
were
connected to the proposed building.
It was an outdoor connection. This was all roof deck, and then there's a door here.
Right.
So it's really no different than what we have now, which is on the 2nd floor. You'd walk out of the drill shed parking into the building the same way. There never was an internal connection.
Okay.
Actually, the real connection is in the lower level parking. That's where both buildings connect underground from a convenience standpoint. But there
In the
really is
in the
no-
basement.
There really is no interconnected use between the 2 buildings, other than on weekend parking there would be.
Mr. Granoff, if I can just ask a couple of questions. So, our regulation for the HO really talks about restoration, not renovation. And if there's a report that says that there's some serious structural issues about restoring it, we do need to see that. But it does create a bit of a quandary that we have to grapple with, because the HO is something that, is a regulation that we're trying to take seriously. So I appreciate all your efforts, but there's a lot in the details, and so And this is probably too early to really talk too much about some of the particulars of the renovation. But my concern is how well it will be done, and how you will reconcile using new materials to synthesize the old.
Yep. And I sincerely appreciate that. As an architect that's renovated many historic buildings in town, including the historic Greenwich Post Office and others, as you probably know, 330 Railroad. The intention is to accurately and historically do a reconstruction, as well as can be done. That is the intention to a high level. It starts with matching the brick, which my firm did 10 years ago when we redid the opening on the north side. It's very important to get the brick right, and then the details. Literally, we do photographic documentation and copy the details. And that's a couple of the ways that we do that. But it gets down to attention to detail, and I think my client is prepared to do it right and to spend the money to do it right.
But to your point, Mr. Levy, what we receive from the HDC, who are granted advisory to us, so we don't have to necessarily follow what they said, but what they said to us is that in regards to the armory, which is one building that includes the drill shed, the HDC feels that no part of the entire armory should be demolished, as any part of its removal for granting historic overlay is a violation of the regulations, criteria, and intent. And that's essentially, I don't know if you remembered, we read it, you were reading it over the weekend, I know, but that's the exact wording. And so you're right, this creates a quandary, as you put it, because it's being torn down and rebuilt.
And
but
does that preserve this
The history.
opportunity to use an HO here?
Right.
We certainly appreciate the idea of doing something to preserve historic property, but the will to, but there is a difference between doing it as per the regulation and what you're proposing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, that is a key consideration in this.
I do find it interesting that in 2007, the Historic District Commission thought that just preserving the wall along Mason Street was sufficient to be able to build the 9 units of 27,000 square feet. And even last year, the shed was not an issue. They thought the shed can go.
That's not, that second example is not before us. We
No,
didn't see
but-
it. We don't know anything about that second example,
but
so you
it-
can't raise it to us as a precedent. We have a letter that gives us their opinion today, and we take it as advisory, and I hear you, we've talked about the 2007 before, but right now what we have before us is this advisory opinion, which we are taking into consideration. And whether they did something differently in 2007, which we also did, but as I remember, that was a facade that was a facade easement, not an HO.
They would have needed the HO designation to be able to
You
get to the
wanna check
.9
that,
FAR
Katie?
because
But
No,
I
they
remember
use the-
they were 27,000 square feet.
They use the triple asterisk, which gives them the .9.
And anyway,
which is they could do that again.
all that said, you're asking us to go to the limit of the HO regulation, and I'm not sure that it's warranted, given the situation here. So I think you still have a lot of work to do in order to justify such density.
I was going to get into that a little later. Why don't I have Mr. Adler?
I'd like you to get into it a little later. We're raising
Because
the
I-
issues as we go.
We'll go, yeah.
I think it's important to talk to Mr. Adler because I have a different concern, which I almost feel that I don't almost. I feel personally that this is being backwards engineered. That rather than start with what the applicant needs to do and the structure that works for them, it's going backwards. And the parking and the traffic, I feel, get squeezed and aren't necessarily optimal for the applicant. And I'd like to start there with what Mr. Adler has to say, because that's a very significant concern for me. So we have you're hearing a lot of concerns. One is on the HO side, and the other one is on this. Has this been designed in a way that really meets what the applicant needs to be doing, wants to be doing, and then you get the structure? If it feels like we started with a structure and then backwards into it. Now, I could be dead wrong, but as I read some of the parking and some of the traffic issues, that's where I start to come out.
Let me talk about that a minute before Bernie gets up.
Well, that's Bernie that I want
because-
to ask questions of.
Well, but I think there needs to be a little bit of background.
I'm willing to be wrong, but
with
I need his answers to
I-
my questions.
I will expose Mr. Adler to your questioning later.
Okay.
But Chabad has been on Mason Street for 20 years. It
that.
has been a growing congregation. It has come back to you on 4 separate occasions for additional preschool space. We started out with 24 at 75 Mason Street for the preschool. We went up to 32 in 75 Mason. We then went to 40 children, and then we came back to you last year for 16 additional children in the building next door. As part of all of this growth, it's been at
So does
least
that make 56?
a total of 56 currently. That's the number of children currently involved in the preschool, and as part of this plan, we're looking to increase that to 80. But as part of all this, the congregation and the synagogue itself have been growing. And it's been about 10 years that Rabbi Darren has been looking for a new home.
I
And
don't
we've
think you
looked
realize
through-
you're preaching to the choir on this.
Well,
I'm actually
but
thinking...
it leads
you're not-
into
You
Mr.
didn't hear my question. I don't think you realize where I was going. What I was going with is that I would actually be happier, I personally would be happier with more on the site if it really accommodated the long-term growth needs of the Chabad. What my concern is actually, I am concerned that there is not enough parking, that there is not enough consideration of the growth, and that we would be better served to really take that into account first, and then build what suits that long-term growth. And I feel it's been backwards engineered and not fully considering. So you're not convincing me, I'm convinced that this is a growing congregation and that it needs to be accommodated. So, but what I'm concerned about is that not all of the site demands are being taken into account, and not all the long-term growth is being taken into account, and that they're going to get space limited by this design. So I'm in a very different place from what you may hear from other people, and it has to be the whole commission that votes, but that's how I'm seeing it. So you don't need to convince me that this is a growing congregation. I got that.
Rabbi Darren has had this vision of what he needs for his flock as they move forward and as they continue to grow. And we've been looking for space that's approximately 20,000 square feet for a number of years, and all of the sites have been in the center of town, on Railroad Avenue, right next door here. That unfortunately, someone else beat us out for the 12 units of
Okay.
condo that are there, but it's all been in the center of town.
So since you won't let me talk to Bernie Adler, I'm going to start talking parking right at you. Okay? So
Well,
the first thing is, no.
Since
so
you
the
brought up
first thing
whether
is-
it's large enough or not, I wanted to have Rabbi Darren
No,
talk
let me-
about
this is- no.
how we ended up with the plan that we have before you,
So-
and does it meet his vision of the future?
Let me tell you what my concerns are about it. You have a certain amount of space that is committed to Fawcett, which they are not fully utilizing at this time because their building is not fully occupied. If that ever changes, you're counting on those vacancies in that space which belong to Fawcett have been assigned to them. Number one, it says it in every document I've seen, there's 88 spaces assigned.
91.
91 spaces assigned to them, of which you are counting that only 45 or 51 are, and your peak demand is for 85 spaces during the day. Then you say, Mr. Adler says that there is no demand during our peak traffic hour. And yet, if I pull out the Chabad schedule, there are things going on, classes that go on at 9:30 in the morning, and those are not included in your analysis. So if those grow and they become more, because right now it's only 2 days a week that you're having them, you're going to conflict with that office parking. So my take is, based on things that were excluded from the parking analysis and the traffic analysis, that you in fact are underparked right now, and therefore it's not accommodating the growth. There are inconsistencies in when people are going to drive and when they're going to walk. The number shifts, and I kind of get some of that, because sometimes people are going to go to a prayer meeting and then they're going to go to work, so they're going to have their car with them. On another day, they might be able to walk. During the Sabbath, they're going to walk. But that isn't clearly explained to us. So I can't tell what percentage is actually going to walk and what percentage is going to drive, because it gets changed. I've spent days looking at this right now, and I'm concerned significantly that the traffic and the parking are underestimated. So I'm coming from a very different place from everybody else. I get that. I'm pretty much okay with doing a facade easement and doing a .9 FAR if we were sure that all the site accommodated the needs that this congregation has, the needs it has.
Yeah, I would just point out that you've received a report from your traffic consultant and from the town engineering division
Both of which say
that does not have an issue with the
But it's
parking.
a funny thing. Our traffic consultant, what they said...
Or with the traffic.
Well, what our traffic consultant said was that they didn't agree with the the SPEAR report using ITEs when people have actual data.
Right.
But then it said, if there are additional, I'm paraphrasing, if there are additional uses that are going on in this building during the day, they should be included in the analysis. So I go online and I look at the calendar for the Chabad, and sure enough, there are all these uses that were not included in Mr. Adler's analysis. There's classes during the day. I figured out that the men's breakfast is actually at Mr. Granoff's office, and it's not over on Mason Street. But I had to go through the daytime uses piece by piece, and I don't think this is an appropriate way to do an application, and it isn't starting with the need that you have. Okay, now I was going to say all that to Mr. Adler, but you wouldn't let me, so there you go.
I'm sure he's been listening to that, and perhaps it would be a good time for him to respond
There
to your
you
question.
go. I'm sorry. I know the rabbi wanted to stand up and speak, but I think we need to get to the facts.
We'll have more time later in the evening.
We need to know that this works for the congregation and how it's been analyzed and how it's been put forward. And I don't want Rabbi Darren to pretend he's Mr. Adler, okay? Just.
Bernie, the plan as developed and as presented to you for your traffic and parking study, in your professional opinion, does it work to provide adequately for the uses that are proposed in the facility?
Well, I guess all you can say is yes.
Hi.
Kind of set you up. Hello, Mr. Adler.
For the record, my name is Bernard Adler. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Connecticut. I'm a senior director of traffic engineering for the Chazen Company. Adler Consulting is a division of the Chazen Company. I was going to go through a list of things. I was going to talk about the DLS report, the beta report, and some of the staff comments. But if you want to...
No,
Start.
I want to hear you. I mean, Mr. Hegney wouldn't let me ask you questions. He kept
No.
trying to defer it.
Mr.
So-
Hegney is right. I was listening.
Okay,
I
so
do.
if you want to go through all the pieces, that would be, I think, much more helpful, because I'm having trouble pulling it all together.
I did go through the traffic and parking in the study before. I think what I'm going to do now is add some additional elements that may address some of your concerns.
Okay, so
Let's see if we can do it, and we'll
the
work at it.
first, the first point of the response that you sent us today, which now, okay, somebody's going to also, okay, you say, the question of the 8:30 to 9:30. So, yes, you count the synagogue and the daycare, but then it turns out that there is, and I can give you the schedule, I printed the calendar. It turns out that there's a meeting at 9:30. I can't remember what kind of a class it is, but
It was
it's,
adult education.
then at 1:30, which is also not included in your analysis, there is a service every day that's on the calendar.
Where was that?
And for that, you have to have, oh my gosh, what's the word, a minyan?
Yes, 10 people.
Okay, so you have to have 10 people. I learned a lot this weekend. So there's the service at 1:30. And then, okay, so I didn't end up just asking you one question, and I'm sorry. So then the other thing is, you consistently refer in your analysis to the services being after the Fawcett Place people are gone. But on Fridays, the sun sets before 5 p.m. until January 21st. Between November, when did we change time? November 4th and January 21st. The sun sets before 5 p.m. So you have Noviembre, enero.
Preschool is closed.
So November, in the month of November, and the month of December, and the month of January, you have services that open at 4:30, that have to be at 4:30 or up to 4:59, even though you've assumed that the office spaces would be
Have
vacated.
not.
Well, you say that there's no uses,
But-
you say the services are only between 6 and 7, or 5 and 6, depending on sunset, but sunset is actually before 5. Do you see why that's so confusing for a
So
poor little
let me-
person like me? I mean, you say between 5 forward, but the sunset's before 5.
The reason I used the 5 to 6 timeframe is because I wanted to add the traffic volume from that service into the PM peak hour. And that's the reason we said it's 5 to 6. I know very well that this week
Okay.
candle lighting for Friday night is going to be at 4:11 p.m. And the Sabbath is going to end at 5:13 p.m. And last week it was pretty much the same, and then it's going to start getting later every day from now.
Your sentence says that there is no conflict between the faucet use and the Friday services.
So let me explain that, if I could. The parking on a Friday night for the Friday night service is basically a limited service. It is not like a conservative or reform congregation,
I got that.
and it's usually that minion of people that you're talking about. So you might get 15 people
You
coming.
counted 16, as I remember.
And what happens is, as you get to the Friday night service going, more of the people become walkers rather than drivers. But the only place we're parking is on the Mason Street main level, where we now have 31 spaces because the daycare on a Friday finishes before 3.
But actually, what you say further on in your report is that some of the daycare stays till 5, as does some of the
Weekday.
faculty.
Just weekday, not a Friday.
Well, Friday's a weekday. How am I
Well,
supposed to
but-
know Friday's not a weekday?
Because Friday night
Sorry,
is
I'm not
because-
being funny.
Okay, well, Friday night is different because Friday night begins the Sabbath. So the services, the daycare, it goes to about 4:30 every day except for Friday.
Okay, I can't find the quote where you have, but you don't make a distinction. You say that the teachers stay till 5 and that some of the children stay till 5. Because some of the
4:30. Okay.
Because some of the parents are teachers. I mean, yes,
That is true.
okay? You also have an assumption that the teachers are going to carpool from New York. How long do you know that that's going to last?
Forever.
Well, nothing is forever,
Well,
Mr. Adler.
You have to understand the Chabad community. And the Chabad community, which is centered in Brooklyn, raises a lot of young women who are willing to teach. And they go wherever they need to go to teach. And they come en masse in like a van. And there are like 8 of them that come in one van, and they're there to teach the children. And the rest of the 11 spaces that are required are local faculty and parents as well.
Okay,
And I've heard this now as long as I know Chabad, and I've known Chabad for a long time. I met my wife in Chabad.
but would you make that assumption for a traffic analysis?
Absolutely, because it's based on what's going on. It's if you have something, you could take ITE data and just apply it blindly and find that it really has no bearing on the situation. And that's really why we apply site-specific issues.
All right, now, one more thing, coming back to, there's some kids that stay till 2. Right, okay. So, and then it says, children who are leaving after 2 p.m. would attend the aftercare program and would leave at 3, 4, or 4:30 p.m. Again,
It's
not
the
clear,
4:30.
not clear that that's not on a, that doesn't happen on a Friday. And also, you don't take into account, and I keep not finding the calendar, the calendar that I had. You've got stuff during the evenings other times. You think I've lost it in this? No. You've got stuff going on evenings other times.
You're talking about the current Chabad of Greenwich
Yeah,
calendar.
and they're going to grow.
But
So is
it's
there?
not necessarily the same calendar as you'll get when they move
Okay,
to
I'm all right.
Mason and Havemeyer.
Give me back my stuff, though. Okay.
One of the points that I was going to bring up.
Go ahead. So teachers, I have a note here that the teachers stay till 5 p.m. Also, the drop-off, and you didn't consider this, that I could find, the drop-off for the kids, the maximum drop-off period is between 9:25 and 9:40 a.m., right when you have that class that starts at 9:30 right now for adults.
The class for adults is going to start after the last drop-off.
But it doesn't say that. Do you see what, I mean, you're
Well-
telling me that now, but that's not what's on the calendar, and that's not what's in your analysis. You never mention that that class occurs. And the reason I'm sounding critical is because I think there should be an accommodation so that this congregation can grow and be comfortable in its new space. They're spending a fortune to do this, and they should be comfortable for a long time in it. And I'm concerned that there isn't enough generosity in the parking for their growth, for what they need.
Well, the other factor on this is, and by the way, we did look at the timeframes very critically, and we spent a long time talking to Mariashi, Rabbi Darren's wife, about the daycare, about the time when each of the groups are going to start, and to be able to separate them so that we can get a spread in demand so that we don't overload the traffic and the parking, and it's particularly the parking. So that's what we did. We did that a number of times. We did that at the Sandwich School, for example, when we shifted the primary house and the lower house and the secondary house, all another 15, 20 minutes, just so that there won't be a demand one on top of the other.
But you didn't have in the Stanwich School and in some of the other things, something that is growing so organically and is such a strong organization, because that's clear from the history you guys have told us, that this is an organization that's really counting on future growth and has accomplished it. And so what should happen is a facility that accommodates them comfortably. And I don't know how else to say that. I just keep feeling like I ask a question and then someone says, oh yeah, well, we'll move the time. But that use wasn't actually included. I kept finding things in the calendar and I kept seeing stuff that wasn't really counted. Like the morning only has the daycare in the numbers that I saw.
And
Okay.
again, the reason that we
Not letting
did
him
it that
talk, am
way
I?
was because those were the critical volumes, traffic volumes and parking volumes that also overlapped with the morning peak highway hour.
Okay.
And that's why we focused on those. And that's, and something that occurs between 9:40 and 11:40 is at just as a very low time in traffic volume, so it doesn't need to get counted.
I'm not as worried about the traffic as I am about safe parking.
Okay, so let me tell you about the
My biggest
parking
concern is
again.
around sufficient parking to accommodate the growth and
So
for
there
what the needs are.
So there are 31 parking spaces on the main level. 11 of them are occupied by faculty. So that leaves 22 spaces, 31 less 20. Thank you.
Right.
So those spaces are purely for drop-off and pickup. They're the 20 spaces. They're not for anybody else to park there. Once that parent or caregiver drops off their child in the morning, that space becomes empty. It gets filled again the next time frame, and again the next time frame, and then it stays empty until the pickup time frame. So when those students are in class and those parents are not there, those 20 spaces are empty. They can easily accommodate the 10 or 11 parents that come in during the morning adult class education. And I've been watching this for a long time. I haven't been watching specifically the Chabad of Greenwich, but I could tell you that those classes don't grow to 50, 60 people. They grow to 10, 11, 12, maybe 15 people. And people come together also. So you don't need your own car to park to occupy those 20 spaces. So it really is a limited group of people that come, and they have all those spaces available to them.
But if that was the case, why not list all of the people using the facility every day and how the parking was going to work for all of those people? Why do this now and say, well, we just think it's going to work because these people are going to drive away and these people? That's what my concern is I don't know what is just an assumption.
Well, we
And
could,
there's just not-
we could prepare an addendum to list all the other functions that are going on. And for example, there were also a men's adult class
Right.
that happens 7 to 9 p.m. at night.
I know that, but I didn't think that was a factor because at that point, you don't have,
Well,
one of
again,
the problems is,
don't worry about the 91 spaces because we're not using them between Monday and Friday.
I hate to tell you this, but that's what they pay me the big bucks for, is to worry about the spaces.
You can worry about them, but we're not allowed to use them. Mrs. Nitkin, there's going to be a gate at the door, at the entrance
Which
of
leaves
each-
you with 38 spaces to accommodate all.
31.
91 y 30. So you have 118?
We had 31 spaces on the main level on Mason Street.
But in total, you have 118 still, right?
31 plus 91 is 122.
But I thought you were down to 118. Okay.
Well, that number's
Okay,
changed.
whatever. Okay. So you've got in that number of spaces, you have to accommodate a fair number of activities. There is no parking on the street during the day. That's Soul Cycle ties up the Mason Street parking completely off and on all day.
I know.
So you have to be able to accommodate the parking on site. So yes, I would definitely want to see all the uses, everything that's going on, and the growth that's expected and how it's going to be accommodated. Because that is what this congregation needs to have.
Right.
So I would like to see that addendum with everything that's going on site and how the parking is going to work for everything.
We will.
And some explanation, which baffles me still, of when people walk and when they don't. Because I get that they're going to walk during the Sabbath,
Right.
and they should be walking on Friday evening after
Well,
sunset.
as soon as sunset, it's the 25-hour period from sunset to sundown on Saturday. That's when the walkers are.
Right. So I would very much like to see that, to get really comfortable that this is going to work for the congregation.
I will have to work with Darren's to get a complete list of projected, not just what they did before, but what the future
Yeah.
of the congregation is.
Because you're going to be doing, if you're growing, you're going to have more stuff, and that's a good thing.
Right, but a lot of these things just don't grow. The thing that is always the critical issue is like the number of seats in the sanctuary. That grows. That's when you have a bar mitzvah or another ceremony and people come on a Saturday. That's when you need to have the parking. That's when you need to worry about whether it's 1/3 walkers and 2/3 drivers, which is
Well,
what
for
we
that, you-
projected. And that's when we have the opportunity to use the entire 91 spaces in addition.
And also that part of what you guys are going to do is give us a plan on how you would accommodate when you have a funeral or a big event that's during the week, on a weekday. And I think you're working on how you would address that.
Yes, we will. Yes, we,
Okay. So
we
those
are.
are two, and that is critical because truly, you're nodding when I was talking about Mason Street during the day. To our eternal frustration has been what happens with the Soul Cycle.
We did the Soul Cycle study, and we told them that they couldn't expand. I mean, that was the bottom line. We said, you might be able to find a slot before 5 a.m., but once it comes 9:30 in the morning, there's no available space in the parking on-street within 1,500 feet of the Greenwich Financial Center.
Okay, so those two things would be great to have, and I'm sorry, I spent so much time drilling down into this because I want this to work for people.
Right.
And I wasn't clear that it is working, so that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, take a breath. Is there a way to show this that isn't all written in a text that there's so many caveats to? I mean, there must be.
That's a great question.
When I was in engineering school in 1973,
goodness.
they told me that traffic would never be a problem because computers would control everything. And here we are 50 years later, and it's still a problem. There must be a way
That's
to show
why I
this.
still have a job.
What's that?
That's why I still have a
And
job.
you may work
Yeah.
forever, Mr. Adler.
There must be a way,
Especially
a
with the
better way
Greenwich
to
Planning
show
and Zoning
this.
Commission asking you questions.
Because as I read through, and then your report, and you go back and forth, I'm kind of following, but I agree with the chairperson here, the chair lady, that it
Madam
gets really
C, yeah.
confusing because then there are factors thrown in that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping there's a better way to show this, that's all. In other cases, we've asked for like a timeline and then exception and who's coming and how many, and then you compare it against the parking spaces, and you can see where, maybe a stoplight chart or something to say, hey, we know in this time there could be an overflow or something like that. I
We
don't know.
tried very hard to address the daycare because the daycare was a very different type of operation,
And you have to make sure it's safe.
and we had to make sure it's safe. And because we're all focused on one floor with parents and caregivers carrying or walking, hand-holding their children, we wanted to make sure we had sidewalks, raised pedestrian platforms to go from one side of the parking to the synagogue building. That was a very critical factor for us. We wanted to make sure we enhance safety for the pedestrian.
No, we got that, and you got an architect to do that, and he's a great architect.
Don't tell him that.
No. But what we're talking about, though, is parking and traffic, not the architectural sidewalk, so to speak. So,
Well, traffic calming is a traffic issue, not an architectural issue.
okay.
But I like to think of that because I've done a number of traffic calming studies.
Well, maybe that's the way to
Speed
split the
humps.
model, too. I mean, it's school, it's religious services, it's other events. Maybe that's the way you can organize the model, but it's still got to be by time of day, by day of week.
Right.
Because that's where I think everyone is getting confused.
We will try to put a full program together and try to address everything else.
This can't be the first time that this happened anywhere. I mean, there's always mixed use.
Again, we tried to focus
In a
on
tricky
the main
location.
issues,
It is.
the ones that are critical. I've always, whenever I give a presentation on traffic engineering, the issue usually happens during the critical time frame, during the afternoon highway rush hour. We call that the PM peak highway hour, the morning peak hour, sometimes the midday peak hour, and sometimes the Saturday peak hour, sometimes even a Sunday peak hour. But if something happens at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and there's a very quiet traffic pattern around the area, it's not something you always address. I don't say, hey, that's good, so I'm not going to address it. I just don't address it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is that because we also have low parking availability on Saturdays, it's another reason to really focus tightly on what goes on Saturday, and again, to make sure that you're accommodating. Now, I'm not sure if I ask you this question, Mr. Granoff or Mr. Hegney, but I'm going to give you a shot.
Let me try.
One of the reasons I was interested in the setback wasn't because of the massing, but because I was thinking that when people walk out the front, it would give people a place to stand and visit for a while if the building was further set back, and that it would be safer for people to have space on the sidewalk and within the building setback. But the way the setback has been done, it's plantered, so nobody could go stand there. And
But there's a very large area in the
I'm
front.
just going to point out that
so you're thinking
area.
they could go in that front hall?
No, well, this is the sidewalk here, right? So you have all this sidewalk area. This is our property line. It is planted left and right, but this whole area here is a gathering space, and then there's
Okay.
the vestibule on top of that.
Where
then
people could
there's the
stand.
entry hall.
Okay.
So this space here, I don't even want to guess how many people could.
People
Hang
don't,
there.
where I go, people don't tend to stand in the vestibule, they tend to walk outside
On a nice day.
on a nice day,
Yeah,
so it was
what we're
just,
saying is this space here, and again, the sidewalk is here, so you're talking
okay.
about.
So that was
It's
one
like
of the
50
interests.
people, in an area like this?
Right,
Yes?
okay,
And
but
then
is,
there was that other issue that we addressed the last time, back early November, about the collation, the kiddush that happens, and that's where there's the gathering.
So then-
Because after services, everybody gathers together and shares time together at that time, at that location. So it's a non-concurrent event that's happening in the back area of the synagogue, of the sanctuary, and that's where people stand and talk. That's
Okay.
where the schmoozing goes
okay,
on.
good.
One other thought, when you do that model, we've been talking about on-site, and that's what we want, obviously. But in other cases, there have been emergency backup parking. We've had a number of conversations about shared parking. But we really don't want that, but, just as a thought somewhere out there, that, hey, if there's a contingency necessary, maybe there's something else. Like across the street is an office. I don't know how well occupied it's on Saturdays, because that's an issue, or Friday night for that matter. But
Well,
it's
if
not
you-
what we want. Go ahead.
If we have 130 seats, and if everybody were to drive, the parking requirement would be one for every 3 seats. That's 48 seats, 48 parking spaces.
Right,
We already have 31 parking spaces.
right.
That's what we have. But we also have 91 spaces in addition.
Certain times.
No, but that's when we have that function. That's on a Saturday when the gathering happens. People
So you have a
work Monday to
funeral-
Friday.
So you have a funeral on a Tuesday.
You're going to
Well,
address that.
We will address that.
Okay.
We will address the funeral, we will address Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are issues that have to be, presented to you. Do you want to hear the rest of this stuff, or
Sure,
spend time on it? So,
absolutely.
all right. So the first thing I want to address, I'm sorry?
So did I, but I don't know as much as you do.
Well, you do. First thing is there was a report by DLS commenting on our traffic study as well.
Yes.
But Beta, as well as the town, addressed the DLS report, and they made a statement that a number of the issues are disingenuous.
Right, but they didn't.
I think that was politically correct.
Okay, but they also said that Mr. Adler, okay, so they also said that to the extent that you didn't have all of the activities in your analysis, that should be explored. I can't remember what that sentence is.
So I'll talk about it.
So now we've talked about it,
But
but
I'll
that's
talk about it. I have it here written down.
Huh? I'm sorry.
We need it in writing,
Yeah,
because it sort of goes, you can't take notes quickly enough, and it sort of gets,
and you're a good note taker, so I'd be in real trouble.
Well, I just presented our review of the DLS comment. There's 5 pages of comments and responses.
Yeah,
That's
there's a good
today.
example of what we were talking about earlier. It's hard to follow all the ins and outs, but we just got it. We just got it.
I just got the Beta response today.
Okay, so,
I mean, I thought that was pretty quick of me.
the new Beta, no, I've got that, the new Beta? Yeah, I just,
Do you have any other questions?
I'm going to be quiet for a while, he's trying to talk. I just, the new Beta letter we got on Monday afternoon. Oh, thank you. So, yeah, so you should discuss the additional classes and events that occur regularly and are shown on the Chabad website.
Well, not. we're
That's
gonna
what
do it.
Beta said.
I know, but that we got. I got the DLS report Friday, so I had a few more
So did we.
minutes to be able to give you an answer on that.
Okay.
I just got that. When
But-
did I get it, Patrick? 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock this morning?
Yeah, so I think, but we resolved that. You're going to do that. You're going to give us all the uses.
Right.
You're going to talk to Rabbi and Mrs. Darren, and you're going to get where it's going to go.
Program.
What the future's going to have.
Right.
And then you're going to be able to do an analysis of how it's going to work with this proposed facility.
Or just state that it works.
Ooh, do you think you
I'll have
could
to
give me?
explain it that it works. I mean,
Like
you don't have to
tables
do
that show that
you don't
it
have to do
works.
an intersection capacity analysis for something that happens at 9, 10 o'clock at night.
I'm more worried about parking. During the day,
Again, I will, yes,
analysis,
right,
tables,
numbers.
make me happy.
Love to do that. So I guess we've spent a lot of time on a lot of things. I'm not sure. There was some other questions from the staff that maybe I can just address. There was a comment about the 6 tandem parking spaces and why they were there and what we were doing with them. And again,
That now.
I thought I addressed it last time, but these are for
The
staff
teachers.
and faculty. Those people come at
And they
8:30 in the
carpool.
morning and they stay. They're there all day. There's no turnover and no other movements throughout the day. Do you want me to go over the pickup and drop-off operations again?
For the
How that
daycare?
works?
No, you've got a nice table on it in here.
That's the table of
The daycare.
The program. Yes, and that's
Yeah.
page 32.
But again, Mr. Adler, to clarify on Fridays, that ends in.
I hear that.
Okay,
This table.
right, but that's slightly amended by the conversation we had this evening.
Yeah, that's the thing is
You
that,
need a subtitle of what happens on Friday, is what it is.
Just in
This is
general.
Monday to Thursday, typical weekday. Friday is the Sabbath, so,
we know that.
good.
I'm
So the only thing I was going to add about Friday, sundown begins and people walk. there are only 11 trips, and even with that, we accommodated them in our traffic analysis, so they're included.
So I had one other little question for you that I was struggling with.
Okay?
I think I know the answer, but, for example, when you're at full capacity on the Sabbath, you have 42 vehicles and 130 people. But when you're on Friday night, you have 16 people and 9 vehicles, and that's because people are driving from work or something?
No,
and so
because some of those people will drive Friday night, park their car in the lot, in the Mason Street lot, leave it there until Saturday night,
Oh, Mr.
and
Adler,
then drive it home.
you got to do a better job of explaining this. Because we really missed, I mean, we had no way, yeah, but we had no way of knowing that. So what I see is that you have 50% of the people driving some of the time, and a third of the people driving other times, and I don't know why. So that's very confusing to us. You know, but you have to explain to us how the parking's going to work in a
It is
way that...
predominantly because the more observant peoples are those who go Friday night.
So
Saturday, a lot of people come.
we need a narrative with a lot of footnotes and tables that really explains how this works.
Gotcha.
Because it's very confusing to me. I had no way of knowing how, and remember, we kept asking you the last time, so what % walks? And
And
so
I said-
sometimes it's a third, and
No,
sometimes
it was
it's...
always a third. On page, also, page 32.
But no, it's not a third on Friday nights. It's over
No.
half on Friday
Right.
night's drive. That, no,
I was
okay.
talking about Saturdays.
Okay, but you see the problem.
And I think we kind of glossed over this business with the bus also.
Bus?
The bus. If more people join the congregation and now there's teachers that want to come from Stamford instead of from Brooklyn, I mean, I think you need to get into some more detail on that one also. I don't think, as Ms. Albin raised, I don't think it's a reliable thing to say there'll always be teachers coming from Brooklyn by bus and there'll always be 8 of them. Unless that's a site plan condition you'd be willing to accept, but.
Yeah, they might be. I mean, you said it was always going to be the case. We could
Well,
make it a site plan
it's, you know,
condition.
I've done a number of synagogues, a number of Chabad synagogues, and that's the way it works.
Okay, so that's the thing.
And the sun will come out tomorrow morning, too.
You're so familiar with it that you maybe have assumed that we know things that we don't, but now you know what we don't
Could
know.
be. I will be very happy to try
Okay.
to put something together.
So now that you've been
done.
tortured, does anybody else have questions for Mr. Adler now that I've tortured him for a while?
I can ask a few questions.
Okay.
I, too, question the idea of people coming from Brooklyn. I don't think that's a reliable thing for you to put into the report. You have to assume that people will be coming separately. The other thing is the ramp, where the ramp is going to the second floor on Havemeyer. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about when there's a fire call and the trucks come out. I'm concerned about when an event lets out and traffic pours out onto Havemeyer.
Car traffic, right?
Yes. I'm concerned about the fact that you have 2 entrances and egress instead of, say, 1. I think that the proximity of the ramp to the light is a problem because of the backup on that street. And when you have large events, you're going to have a lot of cars, and it sounds to me like weddings, funerals, holidays. There's going to be. I just don't understand how the loading and unloading of the parking lot is going to take place.
Oh, just one issue that I'd like to address. I'm not sure I can address everything in one breath. But we are going to redesign the signal that now functions purely for the firehouse driveway. That driveway is called a preemption signal. When the fire department presses a button, the light coming out of the driveway turns green, and the lights on eastbound and westbound Havemeyer go to red. And so does the north and southbound Mason Street. So no cars can enter into Havemeyer, which will be in opposition to the fire vehicles getting out. In addition to that concept, we are adding a traffic signal to the driveway that's coming out of the synagogue, and that will turn red as well. So when that light becomes red, those cars will not be able to leave as well. So those cars, just like the ones on Havemeyer and those on Mason, will become red, and those will be precluded from driving.
Wouldn't it be just easier not to have a level of parking on that
We got to
floor?
provide 91 spaces, and we got to find 91 spaces.
Dig a little bit further underneath the site and put more underground parking. There are other ways of doing this. I think that this is a really awkward and tough way to do this. I just don't think it's a very good solution.
Well, I thought it was actually a very novel way to do it.
I don't think it is. I don't like the idea of a ramp. It makes me think of White Plains, not Greenwich. And I think that exiting onto Mason is a much better plan than onto Havemeyer, in all regards, because that's not the only issue when the fire trucks come in and out.
Is everybody done with asking Mr. Adler? Has everyone asked Mr. Adler what they, okay. Thank you, Mr. Adler, and thank you for your patience.
The other thing I'd say about the when the fire trucks come out of the firehouse, they are not quiet. And you know that they're coming, and I think most people still, even today, stop when they see a fire truck with the horn blasting and the lights on. So I don't see that as an issue. And the ramp itself is actually hidden between the proposed synagogue and the gallery next door. So that, again, is not something you see. When you look down that ramp, what you're going to see is the roof of the armory, of the shed. So that's going to be the thing you see at the end of it there.
No, you'll see a ramp going up to the floor above. That's what you'll see.
And your eye will be drawn to the roof of the shed, which we will replace. I did want to, since there have been a number of questions and concerns about how this Chabad is going to grow in the future and where it's been and how it can function properly and adequately in this space. I wanted to have Rabbi Darren talk to you a bit about that now before we go any further.
Thank you. I just wanted to address your question early on, your concern. Yossi Deren, Yossideren. You raised a concern earlier about the general growth, where this is all going. And I believe that much of that concern grew out of last hearing when you asked the question about why do we need this size space, to which we answered because we know
We're going to grow.
We're gonna
I
grow.
bought that.
Right.
I'm there. I got that. You explained that, and
So-
I accept that you've got a real plan for the future. So I've got the size of the facility, the fact that the 130 seats is where you think you're going to end up. Then I got worried. Once I accepted that, I started thinking about the parking. and the traffic. And then we got the second traffic and parking report that said that not everything you're doing was being included, and I got concerned about that. So once you explained what had happened, that's where I started with, okay, this is a growing congregation, and it has to have a facility that meets its future needs as well.
Right. So I just want to say two things. Number one, you asked for a comprehensive analysis chart, easy to read.
Yeah, because we're not so smart
With
sometimes.
caveats.
Right. Very
Yeah,
well
explaining-
explained.
And explaining to us how it shifts.
So we're going to do that.
Perfect.
I just want to give a general approach that I think you bought everything too strongly. In other words,
Sorry.
in other words, let me put everything in perspective. Where we were coming at the response that we gave you last time about we're growing is the fact that we've been working out of a 4,000 square foot facility for 20 years, and we're bursting at the seams. However, and this is the point that I want to say, and it'll be clearly delineated in the analysis, we know exactly what our limits are by regulation and by physical limits of parking spaces. We know what they are. One of the things that drew us to this space is the fact that we have the shared parking concept with the Nitkins. Because if you want to take the uses, let's divide it into three uses: the preschool, the synagogue, and all other events. The preschool and the synagogue are the primary uses, and those are the ones that drive larger amounts of numbers depending on what we can provide. We will give you a good analysis of the other events as well, but the reason why we did not include them is because, as with all of our programs, whether it's synagogue, preschool, or these other events, we look at where we are, what we have, and that's the direction that we move in. We just don't throw everything wide open to the public and say, hey, everyone come, we got a new place. We know what people are going to come to. The sanctuary on this site works very well. That's the kind of growth where people do come to you. You do throw it open, and people will come because there's bar mitzvahs, and more people may sign up to the Hebrew school because that's the way they choose a bar and bat mitzvah location, is depending on the size of the sanctuary. So the sanctuary works very well because of the 120 spaces that we have. And this isn't the kind of thing that we could have found in all the other places that we looked at. So that works very well. The preschool, we're not really growing that much relative to what we have. Yes, we're going from about 50-something to 80. That's a nice jump, but relatively speaking, we have now 17 spaces, and we're going to almost double that. So it's more in terms of the growth, in terms of parking from where we are. We can't grow exponentially in the preschool. We have regulations by state as well that limit us to how many kids we're allowed to have in each classroom. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware that we know exactly what our limits are, and we're working in that direction. So this wasn't built backwards. This was built according to what the site can provide for by regulation.
Yeah, and our job is to question the assumptions that even someone knowing what their future plans are, is to go along questioning the assumptions and make sure that they work. And that's why I drill down so deep, because people a lot of times think that they know it's going to work, and you wouldn't believe how many times we end up seeing people come back. And heck, if we were those people, we'd be coming back too, because you never know.
Is there a relationship in the other Chabads around between the number of congregants
Excellent question.
and the number of students in a preschool? And if so, where do those numbers lie in your proposal?
It's a good question.
Excellent question.
That's a good question. I can
Why
look
we let her
into
be the
it.
planning director.
And I can get back to you with that kind of information. Explain the question a little bit more.
Because you were just saying that the main driver is the assembly space. So I'm just wondering, and that you're not planning to really grow beyond the 80, and you already have a nice jump that you've factored in here. So I'm just wondering how many people you planned, obviously there's going to be a limit at some point in how many people can come to the facility, to come to the sanctuary. So whatever that limit is there a relationship between that number and the number of preschool students that one would have?
I would say that the way this is set up, this provides for beyond the limit of what a larger preschool would create in terms of sanctuary goers, if that's what you're saying. So this sanctuary is larger than what this size preschool typically creates as weekend worshipers.
This sanctuary is larger than what you would need for how big the preschool is. So does the sanctuary meet your long-term needs?
Yes.
Is the preschool, that's an excellent question that Katie's asking you. So if the intelligence from how the Chabads around the world, the United States, whatever, how that works, that would be very helpful for us to understand as well, because that gives us a way of conceptualizing it.
Understood. We'll put that into the...
Great, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And
Also,
that was a
I
great
just want to
question.
refer to a question that Mr. Levy asked regarding funerals. Came up last time also. So, Peter, I just want to make a point of saying that up until now, and there's no reason why it will change necessarily, many people prefer graveside services. So I'm just saying that it's not a very much of a, obviously, we have to plan for the eventuality, but based on the history, it's something that we're going to incorporate and addresses part of your concern. Is that it?
With the,
On
well, we
the-
did. So Katie was just asking, so what Mr. Adler said was that he had accounted for that in his analysis. He hadn't, the fact that the sun sets at 4:11 this Friday, he had actually accounted for that, but that because the service was starting before our peak PM rush, he was only focusing on what is happening during PM rush. Those are the things that they need to put into a table to make clear, because it was too much, that's the thing.
And additionally, the preschool pickup is not happening at that time.
And
It's
that the
closing.
preschool doesn't stay till as late on, it stays till 5 on Monday through Thursday, but not on Friday. And again, that wasn't in the report, so we are wondering, so we're not getting it.
And also,
Okay.
how many people are expected during those Monday
Right.
through Thursday gatherings?
And then the fact, yeah, so.
We'll provide that in a chart for
Okay.
you
So maybe-
and track the availability and of parking spaces
I have
at those times.
I have a feeling it might be time to hear from the public a little bit, unless you would like to add some more thoughts.
I do have some other things I need to go over with you.
Okay.
But I can certainly wait for
What do you
that
guys
till
think?
later. I did want to just say that we have quite a few houses of worship that have very little parking in town.
Yeah,
2 in the center of town that come to mind are St. Mary's and the First Presbyterian Church. And when they have funerals,
it's a mess,
people cope.
but
you know,
it's
that-
messy. Now you have an opportunity to do it right.
These are you don't plan for the high holy days or Christmas when you are planning for the parking, and frankly, you don't know when these funerals are going to occur. And St. Mary's is a block from my office. When there's a funeral there,
It's a mess.
people cope, and
And that
that's
funeral
that's how you
homes are a
deal.
mess too.
Funeral homes are another
None of
challenge.
them have enough parking. That's
Yeah.
no reason to do it wrong on a new application. So I'm sorry, Mr. Hegney, I don't buy that.
Well,
I want these people to
we
be
also
safe
don't
and
want
happy.
the Chabad being treated differently than any
No,
other house of
but
worship we
100
have in
years
town.
ago that St. Mary's was built, we didn't have zoning regulations, so I don't think that's a fair comparison. And
Well,
we
actually-
are applying,
And there was more land around.
and there was that, I mean, we're applying the regulations as fairly as we can, and I think you can't say that you've ever seen us, I think we're bending over backwards, in fact, to try to make this work. That's how I feel right now. I want this to work.
Well, I appreciate that, and we do as well. I would also point out that the First Presbyterian Church, which you amended the regulations to allow for them to
Oy.
increase beyond a 1 to a 1.1 FAR, although they have been here a long time as well, they weren't the size that they are now, and you had a significant expansion there with very little or no parking.
Did you have a chance to do this right and to have a congregation that is happy in its is happy in its new facility? And that's the goal.
And just so everybody knows, the regulation that Mr. Hegney's referring to applies to existing religious institutions, not to new ones.
But it did significantly increase the size of that church. I'll hold the rest of my remarks till later and
Okay.
allow for public
Because
comment.
you'll probably add to them. Okay. So unless anybody has an issue, how about public comment?
Hi, my name is Linda Hannett, and I am respectfully requesting an opportunity for David Spear, who we hired, to come and give an analysis in front of everybody and not just behind closed doors. David, if you would please come up and give us a hand, and then I'll come back when he's finished.
I'm sorry we cheated because you knew we had read your report.
Did she say what her name? Linda.
So you know, Mr. Spear, we have been reading what you did, but it's a great idea to share it.
Thank you. For the record, my name is David Spear. I'm principal engineer with DLS Traffic Engineering LLC. My office is in Windsor, Connecticut. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Connecticut. We've been doing professional engineering and traffic engineering for 35 years. We do probably the majority of our work for new development, and we also do a number of peer reviews. We do them for adjacent property owners in some cases. We also do them for planning and zoning commissions as a consultant traffic engineer for a number of towns. And we were asked to look at this application and review the traffic issues. And I know, you've already stolen a lot of my thunder here because, a lot of these issues have been discussed, and I don't want to
Maybe what you could-
belabor it, but I'd like to.
Set the priorities for us and just tell us how you see what the big issues are.
I would just like to sort of give an overview, and based on the discussion that's already been had, add some additional comments because some new information has been presented and some information has been rehashed and sort of represented as the same as it was before. And so basically, my concern, and I believe has been articulated by some of the commission questions, is that this is really a multi-use development. There's three primary uses. There's the existing office use, which there's a new tenant coming in, which they haven't identified, but apparently they need 15 parking spaces. When the studies were done, the office was significantly vacant, so that use is not fully quantified. And then there's the preschool / daycare, however you want to define it. I think it's more of a preschool operation than a daycare with 80 students and a growing facility up to 80. Granted they're around 60 now. That's one use, and then the third use is the synagogue use. And the concern is that there's two issues. It's supposed to be a traffic study and a parking study. So when you do a traffic study, the traffic study really provides you a before and after comparison, and you try to model. You can count the existing data, you can count the cars, you can analyze the intersections and get levels of service, and so you have a baseline of what's out there today. Then you can make adjustments for assumptions in the background, which is typically done. Then you have to project the site-generated traffic. You add that into the background, then you reanalyze the numbers, and so you can see the impact of the traffic. Well, the crux of that whole process is how much traffic are you really generating, and when does it occur, and does it overlap the adjacent peak hour roadway traffic? And in this case, my experience and my reading of what goes on and what will happen, and maybe it's not entirely correct, but I think there's a lot of maybe not misinformation, but not clearly presented information. So as the discussion earlier shows, because certain things weren't mentioned and were not, and some were assumed that we knew we didn't know. For example, the one key issue here, if the school really ends at 3 o'clock on Fridays, that changes some of my comments. But in total, this is a very intensive use for a very small piece of property. We're talking about 0.8 acres. My yard is about 0.7 acres. I wouldn't dare to put something like this in my backyard. And traffic generation isn't always dictated by square footage. It's often the use. For example, a Dunkin' Donuts fits on a postage stamp, but it's a significant traffic generator. Generates 150, 200, 300 cars an hour, queues back up onto the road, and it has to be designed for. In this case, I think what you're requesting makes perfect sense to have sort of for the parking issue, a parking accumulation study or graph by day and by hour, so that you can see the base parking demand required for the office that's going to be there whenever the school starts, and then how much the school has taken, how much the events take, and then as each thing comes and goes, you'll see how much parking is needed at any particular time. And I think if you do that realistically, you're going to see that it's a very tight fit today with what they have going on. And if it grows, and I have the same concerns you do, that
Well, I got
they're
a
going
lot
to
of them
outgrow
from you.
themselves before they get here. Because we, it reminds me of what I used to work in Manhattan for a few years for Howard Needles, and we designed the Long Island Expressway. And we used to call it the Long Island Distressway. And that thing was over capacity the day it opened, because as soon as you opened it, everyone moved to the new facility. So in this case, maybe you can sort of juggle the numbers and make it work, but the question is, if you are constrained, and I heard comments by the applicant that we understand the constraints and this and that, but do you want to have a new development, a new project that's constrained? And maybe you want a site that you have room to grow, and I just don't understand how a facility of this size and a growing congregation, a growing group, can live on 31 parking spaces. And the vast amount of the parking is taken up by the prior agreements with the 91 spaces. And that takes up a significant part of this property and the parking levels. So and we didn't recrunch all the numbers because it's a moving target. So depending on your assumptions, the estimate in the Adler report on the trip generation is, and I mean, you can look at the table, but it shows in the PM peak hour, I think, 19 trips or 31 trips, some very low number, which really makes no sense for the uses on the site, because especially during the winter months, sunset is actually before 4:30. It's really more like 4:10. The daycare's going, the office is going, and it's really the worst of both worlds. And it was clarified today that maybe the daycare and the preschool closes at 3. They're saying that now.
On Fridays only.
On Fridays. And maybe it does. I don't know. It depends how you operate. And if they control it. Right. And my question, I guess, with that is, are they going to be willing to live with a condition that says, thou shalt close the daycare at 3?
I think they would be.
And then the other issue I have with this is, we've analyzed other synagogues, not Shabbats, but much larger groups. And as they grow and get bigger, they have a lot of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and special events. And I agree that you don't design for Black Friday, for retail. You don't look at the worst case. You know, on special events, you can accommodate that on a case-by-case basis. But when a special event happens once or twice a month, it becomes a routine event. And when it's a routine event, it should be designed for and should be part of your analysis. And I think that of the two issues, the traffic generation and the capacities are on one hand, and those are, you know, relatively good. Your existing conditions are C or better, and you know, if you use the higher numbers, which I think are really 2 or 3 times what's in their study, you may be able to make that work and get to a C or D level, make the capacity work. But the bigger issue, in my opinion, is the parking shortage. And I don't, in my opinion, the way it's been presented, there's not enough parking for the activity as presented. So if they can readjust and represent somehow so that you can sort of see a parking accumulation that shows that 31 spaces is going to do it, then maybe it makes sense somehow. But the other issue, and I'm waffling back and forth.
No, that's okay.
But the other issue
Good,
regarding the trip generation is when, you know, ITE is the standard document for trip generation. If I do a study for a bigger development, many towns require the ITE trip generation data. And if you don't use it, you have to explain why you don't use it. And if there's limited data for a particular use, the recommendation and the industry standard is to do a similar facilities study. A similar facility study is not to go ask the applicant and your client, what are you going to do? A similar facility study is to go out and find a similar facility.
Which is really what Mrs. DeLuca asked for before.
Exactly. So it's preferred if you could get 2 or 3 of them so you have a good sample. But even one would give you a lot more information than you have today. So if you can find a Shabbat that's similar to this, and even if it's not the same size, you can prorate it based on the various sizes and assumptions. So if you have a baseline for a group of 100, 120, seating for 200, whatever it is, you can take an independent variable and you have so much parking demand, so much traffic generated. As long as your programs are similar, they don't have to be exactly the same. You will get a very useful estimate of what that facility generates, because it's very difficult to take numbers and this doesn't apply only to synagogues. If you, for example, look at an office building or retail building, people will say, oh, you know, we have only so many employees, we're going to sell so much goods here, and we can translate our sales receipts into traffic and parking, and you really can't, because there's no direct way to correlate between this remote information and the parking and traffic numbers. The most accurate and the way that it's normally done is to actually count the parking, count the traffic at a similar facility, and then you have some hard numbers that you can use. And you don't have that here.
Okay.
So that's really the crux of it. I looked at, and I got this 15 minutes ago, not Friday, last week, our response.
We did too, we got it at 7 o'clock.
Anyway, I did read through it, and most of the responses, he reiterates what he said in his report, and there's no new information, and they didn't try to really address anything or document anything. The only response that I thought was actually useful and responsive was number 8, where they said they would be able to relocate the dumpster so that they can get access to it, and they would provide a loading space. Other than that, there was no new information. So anyway, that's kind of where my thoughts are, and if you have any questions, I'd like to try to answer
This is
them.
interesting, this similar facility I got it on. The similar facility study. Can you expand that? I mean, just curious, for example, other kinds of religious organizations or something like that? Or
Well, you want to compare apples and apples. So you want if you're going to do some other concert at a different facility, you want to use another one like this. So you don't want to compare other religious institutions. You want another Shabbat, and you really want one that's very much in line with this one, because all synagogues are not the same either. They all function a little bit differently.
So
And-
if you wouldn't take one, say, on the Lower East Side where everybody is within walking distance. For example, I'm going to an extreme at this point, or Brooklyn or somewhere where you're not going to have the car traffic, you're not going to have the same percentage of walkers. You know, you need another one kind of in a more
Suburban would be best in a similar location. However, even one in a more urban location would be useful if you can quantify the walkers versus the drivers,
Right.
and you know the distance of the congregation to the facility. Then you can make some assumptions as to how far people will walk, and you could then, translate that
Well-
to your other site.
And Rabbi Darren has offered already to compare to other Chabads, and I think he would be doing it versus suburban. I know that there's more than one in Connecticut, so we could be using those as comparison points as well. I don't
But
know.
you'd have to back into it. And the other issue, again, is, and this one I think is, it's been presented as they have dynamic growth here, so the typical growth assumptions may not apply. And in order to do anything, even if you collect the similar facilities, you need to have a clear picture of what the projected growth looks like, and what is that going to be, and it has to be realistic. You can say, oh, we're going to grow 10%, 20%. Percentages may not apply because the existing site may be constrained by their size. They have 4,000 square feet, so many people can go there and function
Right.
acceptably. So once they get to a different site, things change, and you
Right.
have to assume what are they going to do with the new site.
You're thinking about the Long Island Expressway.
I'm just saying, in my opinion, it looks to me like a very, very tight fit here, and whether or not, my opinion, similar to yours, is that, and I know maybe there's only a certain number of sites that are even remotely possible for them, but it is one that with this many constraints, is that really in their best interest? And the cost of building this is astronomical for the number of people that you're talking about to build a three-story building and a three-level garage. And speaking of the garage, that's one other issue which I should comment on that I didn't mention, is that it's very odd to have a garage structure with three separate entrance points
We've asked about them.
that are not interconnected.
Yeah.
So the internal circulation really doesn't function,
It
and you
was-
can't get from level to level, and you can't tell what's full and what's not full, and
We asked about that. It is to keep, what was told to us, that it was to keep it segregated, to keep it separate,
I
so-
understand what they're saying.
And then also because the more ramps you have, the more you use up your square footage and you lose parking availability. And that was, so again, it comes back to there was a parking constraint, and that's why the levels are kept not connected. But we had the same concern.
That's true, but you could look at it from a different perspective and say, well, okay, during the week, we have two levels that are taken, and we don't, we're going to control those, they're gated, you can't use those.
Right.
But during the weekend, we want to use all the spaces.
But they will.
Okay, but you could design the garage such that the two levels are controlled during the week, and during the weekend, you take the gates up and they're interconnected, and now you can see all the spaces. And I know maybe it takes a little more ramp space, but when the architect was talking, he mentioned how they had to put a different additional staircase in.
For the children.
Square footages change a little bit. Typical parking garages, they park on the ramps. They ramp up and down, and the parking happens in the transition between levels. So you don't necessarily
Down low.
lose a lot of spaces by doing that.
Okay.
May I ask another question? The other concept you brought up is, when is a special event a normal event? Is that a way of saying it?
That's a judgment call, really. It's not, in my opinion, if it happens 2 or 3 times a month, I would consider that a routine event. If it happens once or twice a year, that's a special event.
Okay.
I mean, that's sort of our rule of thumb that we
And
use.
based on your experience, other churches, in, again, our kind of an environment, and more of a suburban, are like weddings and funerals special events, or are they normal events? Because you're talking about...
Depends on the size of the congregation. If it's a big enough congregation, it can become a routine event. If you have enough weddings and funerals so that they're happening, averaging out to a couple a month. But if they're not, then and it also depends on the wedding and the funeral. Some weddings and funerals draw 500 people, some draw 50. So the big ones are probably few and far between and may need some additional traffic control. But then the typical ones probably can be handled, by the normal process.
Yeah.
I don't know if that gives you enough answer, but that's kind of how we
Anybody
would
else
look at it.
have questions for Mr. Spear? No? Okay. Next up, Oh, I hate it when that happens. Are you okay?
I hope I.
Yeah, it was,
You bored them over. I mean, you're...
no, he was standing up and his knee gave, I think.
Oh, okay.
I was just standing up to identify myself, that was not for sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Unfortunately, Attorney Fulton is not able to join us tonight due to a physical issue. And so he's asked that this item be continued, which I assume, based on what I've been hearing. I'm sorry, Diane Fox. Thank you. So I'm assuming this will be continued and there'll be additional reports. I had submitted some materials to you. However, as of Friday, when I went into the office and found there was a whole new plan, I'm not sure that's totally relevant. So I won't quote what I said before. However, we want the opportunity to review the plans in some detail. The square footage of some of the rooms is not really noted. And listening to what I heard tonight also, with regard to the number of teachers, if you have 7 classrooms, usually you have 2 teachers per classroom. Whether or not they're going to be band in, and we had gone through this with the Japanese school, if you might remember that. Sooner or later, more and more people tend to relocate, so that's a question mark there. This is a final plan, and I would ask that, I haven't seen the agreement with Richards for the purposes of access into the garage. I think that would be helpful. If this were a preliminary, that might not be as so much. I don't know if you're referring this back to the HDC for design, with regard to whether or not the armory is being rebuilt, restored, redesigned. That would be in keeping with its historic character, so that's a question that I'm asking for your reference on that. The other issue is the declaration of restrictions for the armory for preservation. Obviously, with a new plan coming in, we do need to have the declaration of restrictions to see how it will be preserved. I remind you also that at the time when we approved the 9 townhouses, there were lots of construction issues that were raised because of the fact that some of the walls were not stable, and there was a lot that got involved with regard to the mechanism by which the rebuilding and materials and colors, and also where the parking for the construction people was going to occur. That hasn't, so far as I know, been raised. I'm sure that the applicant can address that, but I would just point those things out to you during this time. And we'll see you again, I'm hoping, in December. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fox.
I'll try this again.
Try it again. We're gonna,
There's one of each of you. Okay, so just pass them down. I apologize for fumbling. My name is Erfurt Porter.
Mr. Porter, could you just pull the microphone up to your face? Thank you.
My name is still Erfurt Porter, and I'm the chairman, the current chairman of the Greenwich Veterans Council. 3 weeks ago, just as a matter of introduction, the rabbi met with a small group of the council members, and we felt it was important to meet again to be sure that we clearly understood what the feelings were with regard to the Shabbat and their partner, if I may use that word, the Nitkin family. And so we've done homework in that regard, and we agreed last Thursday that we would give you the piece that we prepared, which reflects very simply what our view is. And I would add that there was an underlining by the first selectman, whom all of you know, that we wanted to be sure, and we think that you would want to be sure, that when you heard this application, that the application was treated with civility and respect, and if you were going to move forward with the application, that it was a success for all parties, and most particularly the Shabbat. So that's why I'm here. I don't need to read the whole thing unless you would like me to, and the only reason that I would read it, if it precipitates some questions on your behalf that I can answer while I'm here, I'd be happy to do that. I would ask that you also note that I'm the current chairman, and when the Greenwich Veterans Council was formed in 2016, I was chosen, I can't say unanimously, but I was chosen as its chair, with the understanding that since there are 3 veterans organizations that are chartered within the community, that we would go ABC, A standing for the American Legion, of which I'm a member, B stood for the Byram Vets, and C stood for the COSCOB BFW, and that we would rotate, because it is an ad hoc organization, we would rotate the chairmanship accordingly. So with that, I would just summarize what I gave you to say that it is in the interest of civility that the vets have turned out, many of whom you see here tonight, because the Armory has some historic significance as well as having personal significance for the over 2,000 living veterans that live in Greenwich and that have served their country in one capacity or another through the years. So we've offered some suggestions recognizing and appreciating the kind of flexibility that the Shabbat has shown and the creativity that its architect has shown, and offered some thoughts that if in the view of the Shabbat they can make this a facility that has meaning to the entire community and offers alternative spaces that we don't have as veterans organizations today, that would be welcome. There may be others here who don't agree with what we said, either from a veteran point of view or some other point of view, but we wanted you to know that we care, we appreciate the flexibility that has been shown and the responsiveness that has been shown from the applicants. Thank you.
Mr. Porter?
Mr. Porter?
Mr. Porter.
Mr. Nick, thanks for being here, and thank all of you for your service. I have an appreciation for the kind of dedication that it takes for you to be here.
Thank you for your service.
Understanding, I'm not too sure if you heard the testimony this evening that the Jill shed is going to be removed and rebuilt. Did you?
Yes.
Is the Veterans Council okay with that? Are you okay with that? That it would be actually removed and then rebuilt?
I don't know that I'm qualified to respond to what the architect's view was as to why that was being proposed by the architect, except I believe from those that have visited it, including me, that you would find it in a state of disrepair.
Okay, thank you.
You made a couple suggestions here.
Yes, sir?
Have these been discussed with the
They've been discussed within the Veterans Council. It will be the first time that members of the Shabbat have seen them.
Okay.
But I don't think there's anything there that is extreme. The idea of there being a room or an office is in keeping with what, from my own personal understanding of veterans organizations throughout the state, there's only one facility that I know of personally, and that's the West Hartford American Legion, which was owned initially by people that were members of the Legion and who grew that facility into a building today that has a meeting room, has a bar, has a dining facility, and is very well respected throughout West Hartford. If there's another facility like that, personally, I'm not aware of it. So it's a little bit of a stretch for us to suggest what would be appropriate if there was something in the facility that lent itself to meetings. On the other hand, if you do your homework, you'll find that many years ago, the Skills of Scouting program was held at the Armory. And at least according to the Greenwich Time or whatever version it was at that time, there were 3,000 people there. Now, I happen to be an old Scoutmaster, and it happens that Post 29 sponsors a scouting program of which the chief, our chief of police, is a driving force. And since the chief is a veteran, he and an old scout himself and a Boy Stater, you know, he's participated over the years throughout the community programs that exist. And there is a tie between, I'll call the Scouts and the Legion and other veterans organizations as well. But I can't attest to saying that that's a driving force for the architect to go back and conceive of a new meeting place. But we do know that the level of patriotism that exists in Greenwich is extraordinary. We just, on Veterans Day, celebrated the 100th anniversary of the armistice. And for your information, there were 8,000 Greenwich citizens who volunteered or were drafted to go to World War I. The level of participation is very high for other conflicts, whether it be World War II or one of the Gulf Wars or Haiti or wherever. And so there's a strong, love may be a little bit too strong a word, but there's a strong devotion on the part of the community toward our nation. And it is in that spirit that I would hope that you would consider the suggestions that we made. And given our vote for civility in this whole thing and understanding with the rabbi, we know and trust that they will feel the same way. Does
Thank
that
you,
answer
Mr.
your
Porter.
question?
Yes, thank you.
Anything else? Thanks for being here.
Anybody else from the public? Okay, and then Ms. Snyder, and then you.
Okay. Again, my name is Linda Hannett. I'm a Greenwich resident and a member of the Board of Directors at the Virginia Court Condominium, a building that is less than 400 feet from this proposed building. And I'm here tonight representing all of Virginia Court's 49-plus residents. I'm not opposing this alone. I'm speaking on behalf of all of the residents. I speak for the integrity of the quality of life at Virginia Court that assuredly will be negatively impacted by this project, especially as the increase in the congregation and the corresponding level of activity that is projected by the applicant to grow. I feel very much like we deserve a voice, and I feel that you listened to us at our last presentation, and I thank you for that. Incorporating activity level is critical to your decision. On the other hand, I feel like we have been drowned out by politics. All of us in opposition have been asked to work within the existing process, and we all have done that appropriately. The applicant, on the other hand, has on multiple occasions acted outside of that process, with 11th hour submissions not available to the public or us all the way through the process, involving the first selectman, Peter Tessie, who has no jurisdiction here right now, who before you guys, even as a commission, even had the chance to do your job, he's positioned himself right in the middle of a decision. Regardless of his intention, that's offensive to the process and to those of us who are trying to be heard. The fact that Peter Tessie is involved at all, we feel crosses the line. I hope that throughout your deliberations that you come to the conclusion that we have, that this is a phenomenal group that's trying desperately to find a home. I think everybody agrees with that. I think they deserve a place where they can go and grow beyond what Rabbi Yossi hopes for. It's just that they need to find a more suitable space that doesn't turn an existing traffic nightmare, which we are living right now, into anything that can't be reversed or controlled once this building is built. We ask that you help them find a home that doesn't require bending the rules that the rest of us are obligated to follow. Thank you.
Ms. Snyder, I believe you were next.
I just want to make a quick comment to the comments that you made about the involvement of the first selectman, that a meeting was had with the first selectman that involved no member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was with a member of staff. So I just want that to be known for the record. So the commission was not aware of the meeting. Yeah. Thank you.
News to me.
Baron Snyder. I just wanted to briefly say I'm still concerned with the appearance and the size. That's all. I just think in light of the fact that HO zone designation states the purpose of historic overlay zone is to encourage, I'm just going to paraphrase, the restoration, preservation, protection, enhancement, fostering a sense of history and civic pride, and protecting community character. And in light of the fact that the Armory building is part of the Greenwich Avenue National Historic District, and also as a contributing structure, and also on the state's Register of Historic Places, and also understanding that a property owner should have the freedom to use and enjoy their property as they wish. I do think with that freedom comes responsibilities, and I think there is a responsibility to honor the architecture and the historic value of the Armory building, and what it means to so many people in the community. And I don't see any changes in the design that really does that. And I'm worried also about taking down the shed and rebuilding it, because the color of the brick that I saw that is being proposed to be used is nothing like what is on the original Armory building. Also, the HO regulations say that the proposal should be consistent with the POCD, and the POCD workshops have shown for the past year overwhelming support for maintaining the character of the town, the historic structures, no overscale buildings, more setbacks, and preserving the trees, and I don't see that here at all. Also, well, I'm concerned with, I just hope that if they do take down the shed, they will rebuild it properly. And when I look at 599 West Putnam Avenue, and that's the way that stone arch disappeared, and that ugly thing that's there now, I question. I'm worried. So it's the appearance and it's the size, and I wish they would just build something that's more in keeping with the town, and happy to have it there, but just that it just blends in better architecturally, and that is basically it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark T. Wilder, for the record. I don't really have anything sort of analysis like everyone else, but what I can do is I can give sort of a voice, perspective, and context. My family moved to Greenwich in 1965, and we established a business in Greenwich in 1977. So as a business owner, and also over 20 years ago, I had a lot of experience coming to the town and meeting with the town people in terms of one thing in particular that kind of came to my mind was we talk about things being, in charming and in sort of, in line with how the town should look. And one time when we made a very beautiful sign, it was a hand-carved sign, and we were on Lewis Street. The name of our business was Trey St. Clair. We were given a very hard time. And I was at the meetings for that, where when Foot Locker opened up, and now it's, I suppose, CVS, but when Foot Locker opened up, they had probably one of the most garish signs you ever can imagine. And at that time, I remember there was also talk about, what's going to happen, with, at least among the local business people, what's going to happen with Foot Locker, with parking, with, how is it going to change, the sort of charm of the town, and it's going to, go from being a small town to being like a middle city. And I never saw that really being addressed. We had to fight really hard to be able to keep, what we wanted to do with our business, which was keeping in line with our customers. And we had customers from all walks of society. So, and as a small business owner too, not only did I get to know other small business owners, but I got to meet a lot of people in this town. And I just get the feeling that sometimes, we're sort of addressing some of the same issues now, but if we really look back then, there wasn't really that scrutiny on all these other sort of, companies and other stores and all that. So I think that's kind of important to sort of see, like, what are they really, trying to achieve now? I think they're really trying to build something that really is very family oriented. And also in terms of parking, a long time ago, that's happened. I mean, unfortunately, Greenwich has become very busy. It's very hard to get a parking spot. But I think to sort of focus in on the, ugliness of maybe making the changes at the Armory, I mean, I remember, going back 25 years ago, people saying how ugly it was then. And also, I'm a U.S. veteran, so I salute anyone who's a vet. And I was serving in the U.S. Navy. I don't remember going to the Armory or doing anything in terms of for veteran affairs, but maybe it did exist some time ago. But I think the main thing is to really be fair in the treatment. That's my feeling. It's like I just don't. When I hear these comparisons, I think, wow, a long time ago, where was that? People were talking about the same thing. Oh, we got to keep the town charming, but then they went ahead and they approved these chain places coming to Greenwich.
The good news is that federal law requires us to be fair in the treatment of applications for religious land use of any kind. And I really believe we're lucky to live in a country that has that kind of law.
Sure.
So you're right, and we should be fair and we should be even-handed. And it's what I said to Mr. Hegney before. We're blessed to live in a place like this. So.
Thank you.
Sir? And I think it's losing steam. Are we about done? Is there anybody else? One more person? Two more people. Okay. Because we've been here for almost 2.5 hours on this. So I think we're getting there.
Thank you for your time. My name is Dean Gamanos.
Hello, Mr.
I'm a
Gamanos.
Navy vet as well, and I was Gamanos. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but when the previous speaker talked about the armory, I felt compelled to get up here and say a few things because it has been 100 years since the end of World War I, and we spoke about that on Veterans Day. And even though the armory went out of existence as an armory in the 70s, which is why you probably never trained there as a Navy veteran, nor did I, there's a long tradition and history of that armory's service to this country, including World War I, the Mexican War, the Korean War, and other conflicts. And after World War I, there was a huge veterans parade for the veterans returning from World War I. They met them at the train station. There was a big celebration at the Armory. Duke Ellington played there. There were many local community events there. It's a rich history. It's a proud history. And I think we should remember that 30 of our residents here lost their lives in World War I. Many more went over to serve there. And I think what has been proposed for preserving the memory of that armory is important. Thank you.
There she goes. Two more people.
I'm Valerie Stauffer. I served on the RTM District 7 for a couple decades, actually, was chairman. And over the years, and recently with the POCD studies, there's been a lot of concern about the traffic flow and the inaccessibility of parking and the flow. And I worry about the projections on Mason Street with what we hear the usage will be. As it is, the traffic is congested, and I know they're not, in a way, the room is partly filled, but all over town, you hear concern about this. The recent RTM meeting, there was, which I'm sure you all realize, there was just concern that the P&Z is not fully cognizant of citizen concern of traffic and congestion. And I just feel this project seems to be an overpowering for that particular site. Thank you.
Mrs. Stover. More? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Bob Finkel, Finkel. I'm a Mason Street property owner for the last 38 years. Bought my property when I was 12 years old. I'm not a traffic expert. I defer to the experts on the analysis and the data, but I rely more on common sense. And what I've seen over the 38 years of being an owner on Mason Street is an increase in activity, in traffic volume, The whole look and feel and complexion of the neighborhood has changed, and change is inevitable, and change is good. But my common sense leads me to suggest or urge the committee to really focus in on safety and not just rely on the statistics. The comparison of this proposed structure to other similar structures, other houses of worship around town, and some of the comments have been made, I think, are appropriate and accurate. But none of those other locations are located directly across the street from a firehouse. And one thing I can tell you about living on Mason Street is that constantly, hour after hour, okay, our peace and quiet is shattered by the sound of the fire trucks leaving the firehouse, and whether they're going to an actual emergency or just doing a drill, it seems to go on incessantly. I don't know what the statistics are. I don't know how many times a day the fire department actually leaves the facility, but I'm not here to talk about what the effect of that is on our lifestyle. I'm more using that as an example of the kind of activity that occurs quite frequently. And when it was discussed before that when the fire department and the fire trucks are leaving, there would be red lights that would stop traffic from coming out and clear the pathway. My bigger concern is what happens when traffic is being brought into the facility and cars are backed up waiting to get into the garage or waiting for a drop-off, and there's a fire. Now, I work at a school, and we do fire drills all the time. We are advised and evaluated by the local fire department. What has been emphasized to me over and over again is that in case of an emergency, the most important factor in terms of saving lives is time. If the fire trucks are delayed for even 30 seconds in getting out of the firehouse and getting to an emergency, it could cost lives. And I believe that the burden on this commission is to consider that, because the first time there's a story about a fire truck that couldn't make it to a fire in time because it was held up by the traffic on Havemeyer or on Mason, and somebody died, I believe the people who are in this room, everybody in this room, is going to have to bear the weight and the burden of knowing that that could have been prevented. So I urge you to focus as much as possible on the safety issue. I heard it mentioned before. I believe Mr. Levy brought it up, but I don't think it should be evaluated entirely on the statistics and on the studies of the experts. It's very difficult to predict when an emergency will occur, and when it does, I find it difficult to envision that if there's a lot of traffic, the traffic will suddenly part and the fire trucks will go through. So please take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finkel. Mrs. Darren?
Good evening. I have a couple of quick comments just to clear the air of many different things were mentioned. So, for example, Mariashi Darren. Sorry about my voice. Just like, for example, the ramp, I totally understand safety is number one. The ramp is being used only for office employees, not for preschool children. So if you imagine people arrive, people leave, and our entrance and exit is on Mason Street. So just to clear that issue, I just want to clear a couple of things. We looked at a couple of sites in town since 2008. All the sites we looked at, the issue was parking for Saturday, Sunday. We have to be in town. We have 30 families that walk. They're supporting this financially. This is only a synagogue that will buy a property in town. And that being said, why this fits is because it's shared parking. And so, yes, we can find 2 acres right in town, but the fact that we could share this so perfectly makes this property work so well for us, leading into the fact of the numbers. Right now, with 17 parking spaces, we're doing well with over 50 children. With 31 parking spaces, we should do well for up to 80 children. That's a difference of 1 to 4 and 2 to 5. So it does give us the room that we want to grow. Central Greenwich, Central Greenwich surrounding areas is limited to the amount of people that move in. We don't ever expect more than that number in our preschool. If we do, perhaps we'll open a location in Glenville or Old Greenwich where there is no Jewish preschool now, but we do have families coming from those areas. So we don't have to worry about the numbers climbing higher than that. The reason why Friday was not mentioned, which we will correct, but is there's never school when Shabbat comes in. And we lose some Jewish children because of that, because some parents work and they need facilities, daycare for their children until 5. But we follow the Torah very carefully, and that's why that is never an issue with the parking and the daycare being open. I also want to say the reason why we didn't include learning in our numbers, and which we will in the chart, is because we were working with the greatest numbers. And I personally teach a couple of the classes to the moms, and the most you have 12 adults in a class. So because the greater denominator was the daycare, we didn't think that that would ever in any way be an issue of extra traffic. I also want to explain why the teachers will always be commuting, is because the reason why families are attracted to our preschool is because we are teaching children about God, about listening to their positive, good voice inside of them from the age of 2. The only teachers that could do that are teachers that are educated in the Chabad Teachers College in Brooklyn. Those teachers cannot afford to ever live in Greenwich. So, therefore, we will forever, never change the flavor and values of our school, and so we will always have that van commuting. I also want to mention that being the wife of a rabbi and watching funerals, people that have funerals during the week generally do graveside. People that have larger sized funerals generally do it on Sunday. We just had it this past weekend, so that works really well with our parking. And last that I want to mention is that Chabad over the last few years has hosted Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and we are really very excited to host the veterans whenever they need a facility. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Darren. Okay, Mr. Hagney, I think you're on.
I wanted to go over a little bit of the law because you did get a letter from Jim Fulton on behalf of the neighbors that referred to a case involving a piece of property in Monroe, and that went to the appellate court. And I think there's a significant distinction between wanting to construct a McDonald's on the main street, which is what that case involved in Monroe, and wanting to preserve an historic structure. Your regulations are set to provide incentives for applicants to preserve historic structures. That's the big distinction between what Mr. Fulton was explaining in that McKenzie case and what's going on with the regulations that you have here. You have used these regulations for decades. They have been effective in providing for the preservation and enhancement of historic structures. Just a few examples. On the Post Road, you've preserved the original post office in town as part of the Audi facility there, and permitted a significant expansion of that showroom in the last few years. There's a building at 111 Mason Street where the existing building, historic building, had been broken up into 5 apartments. You approved the restoration of that to a single-family home, a significant addition to it, and then 2 additional units in the back that are more square footage than what was there originally. And that's been another way to enhance and preserve historic structures and the streetscape in downtown Greenwich. Also recently, the 24 East Putnam Avenue, where you preserved the facade of the building and had the construction behind it.
You mean East Elm?
I'm sorry, did I say? Yes, East Elm, sorry.
No, you were listening.
I'm glad at least someone still is. The other one that I think is a really good example is the YMCA. And the reason that I bring that one up is that was your decision to approve the addition to the YMCA under an historic overlay was appealed to Superior Court. And that's not in another town. It's not just in this town. It's on the same street. And in that instance, you approved a very significant addition to that building, relatively modern look.
Which is what the federal standard is.
And that was appealed, and the court did uphold your decision based on the historic overlay regulations that you have.
I'll go you one more.
Oh, please.
The Connecticut General Statutes in Chapter 124, Section 8-2M, give a community such as ours, we are what's called a special act community, which means that we have more independence than certain other towns, if you will. Yes, on this it does. It does, but it does, on this it specifies special act communities in 8-2M. In 8-2M, it specifically addresses special act communities, and it says that we can establish historic overlay zones, and that our regulations just have to establish standards for such zones and districts as we establish. So the Connecticut General Statutes specifically reach out to someone who is special act like us and give us the power to do as we have done. Now, so I agree with you 100% that it is within our authority to have the historic overlay and to have the regulations for it. And in fact, I would disagree with Mr. Fulton as well. So I will go you that one more, and I'm going to hand this to Mrs. DeLuca.
Yeah, but just for the record, we follow the special acts as it relates to planning. We follow the state statutes as it relates to zoning, and this is the state statute.
Yeah.
So,
but this has validated our authority.
And I think more to your point, you have established standards.
We have established standards.
That can be applied.
And the point that Mr. Fulton makes is that we are varying our regulations, but we are not. We have established standards, and that is what we're looking at. I 100% agree with you.
And you're providing incentives to be able to preserve historic structures.
And they are
It has
set.
worked well for many years, and I think it's something that you need to continue to
So
pursue.
I agree with you 100% that we are fully within our authority to do the historic overlay.
So the case I want to submit for the record is Carlson versus
Stop.
Planning and Zoning, and it involves the YMCA. It was decided in June of 2004. We would like to continue this to be able to respond and provide the additional information you've asked for this evening to the December 18th meeting.
What would you like to do about the HO? Because as I remember, on the HO, oh, you're going to give us the extension on
But they both must decide, so.
They're,
They'll both be must-decides at the December 18th meeting.
so you're going to give us an extension on all of them to the 18th?
I thought
on
I
both.
had already.
Yes.
No, we've got a must close for both on
Mr. Chair,
13th.
the applicant has submitted those earlier
We
today.
Well, they
submitted
didn't
those
tell
earlier
the
today.
poor commission, so the commission didn't know.
Mr. Hegney, when can you commit to submit that information in deference to the comment that was made by the
We'd
public?
like to
and-
provide that at the beginning of next week.
So then by the 11th, which is next Tuesday?
Yes.
You could have that information just so that people know that they can come into the office and see the information?
Yes, we'll get that together this week and get it to you beginning of next week.
To warn you, it is a big agenda that night.
I have a number of things that have been continued to that meeting, so I was already aware of that.
So it's a big agenda that night, so.
But then we can take the next week off.
And
If we can just make sure that all the questions the commission has raised are answered in a form that doesn't require more investigating that night, it would be really helpful.
What I'm hearing is you want it concise, chart form with explanation
Yeah.
that is clear. And I think I know the format that you need to have it presented in.
Yeah, and I guess whether you come out, I keep asking the question of, would more parking be better? Or, can you get out of, is there a way of undoing some of the commitment that exists?
That was after our last meeting. We did have conference with staff, and we pursued that vigorously because I thought that was a real solution all around. We looked at the parking commitments that are for the 91 spaces. We also looked at the spaces available or the availability at Richards because that's a very large underground garage. And unfortunately, those are all spoken for as well. And there were maybe 7 or 8 spaces there that had some potential, but out of over 100. But we did explore that extensively, and I don't believe that
'Cause
either one of those is a solution.
I realize that there are people who are concerned about the character of the building, but there's also, if you boil down some of the public comments, there is a concern about overflow as well, which is where I am opened with you as Mr. Adler's surrogate.
There's one more issue that we need to raise.
Oh, another issue, Mr.
Just going back through our comments, the major traffic generator comment that was raised by DLS and the 200 parking spaces, did we have an answer?
Mr. Adler did have a response to that in the remarks that he handed in this evening.
Could you humor me with the answer? Okay, so is it a math error, or is it a assumption, or?
That's an
And if you
excellent
could, if
question.
you could repeat the point that it's less than 200, just so we have
I will
that
try
on.
to remember all the numbers, but the one access to go below the Richards driveway provides about 118, if I'm correct, in the Richards side, which is predominantly for Greenwich Financial, and about 66, I think, on the side where the armory is, below the shed. And that number comes out to a total of 100 and...
The zone changes of planning.
183 spaces. So Mr. Spears added up a lot of numbers that don't really go into the formula.
And just for art's sake, your numbers are based on real counts out in the field and not based on, like, here, confirmation from the property owner or something like that?
We counted every spot.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Adler.
Mr. Hegney, Would you be willing to convert to preliminary at this time, only because of the issue still remaining of the High Holy Days and the timeline of getting that sorted out by next Tuesday?
I would like to take the opportunity to have all that material to you so that that could be reviewed over next week, rather than converting to a preliminary at this point.
So then one of the things that you will need to have secured is off-site parking for High Holy Days by next Tuesday.
Understood.
Thank you.
I've had discussions with the Board of Education already on that.
I think Mr. Spear wants to add something, but Mr. Hegney gets the floor last, so.
I thought that's what I had right now.
Yeah. I think the best thing to do would be if Mr. Spear comes back at the next meeting and then addresses the comments, because you're doing your close and we probably need to move on.
And there's more information.
Because once Mr. Hegney is making his closing statement, that's it.
And also,
so-
we're expecting more information, so it makes sense to get it all.
Mr. Adler got to speak because he is part of Mr. Hegney. They're one person for this purpose.
I think
We work closely together.
So, so I think that since you're making your closing statement, we're going to leave it there, and then on the 18th, we'll hear again from Mr. Spear, or we will have in writing what his comments are about. I think the issue about the 200 needs to be clarified. That's my guess as to what he wanted to comment on, so.
And we will provide further information on that.
Because that's a very good question that you raised. I had forgotten about that.
Can I add another to-do from Mr. Hegney?
Oh, sure, he doesn't, he's.
As long as I can do it within a week.
Yeah, the last time around, we asked you to come in on other HOs. You mentioned a couple. Interesting, they're all on the post road in almost cases. Or given that all real estate's kind of location, could you come back with other ones that are maybe more comparable? The post road is, a traffic, commercial kind of a site. I understand there was a neighborhood behind YMCA that filed a lawsuit, in fact, and lost that.
Right.
But it was one neighborhood. This site has more neighborhoods around it, and it's also in a historic area. I don't know, the YMCA, the post office, the Audi dealer, again on the post road.
Yep.
You could go to the church at the top of the avenue on the post road again. I think part of the concern of the residents is this is more of a residential area, given the traffic and the parking issues that are coming up. I would just like to see some other HOs that the town has done that maybe fit this site better than the post road.
All right, we'll get that together for you. And with that, we'd ask that this be continued to the 18th. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm taking a break.
I suppose we could, while the room clears, you want to do a break?
Yeah, 10 o'clock.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will resume with the mill. So for application number 10, Mill Owners Company LLC, and if you would proceed, I believe we have, everybody's back.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Schachter, and I'm here with my partner, Eric Schwartz, on behalf of the Mill Owners Company. Our goal this evening is to summarize what's occurred since our appearance before the Commission 2 weeks ago, when it appeared to most in attendance that we were about to have our application approved, and the application was, at the last minute it seemed, held over till tonight. The stated reason for holding it over was not because of a substantive concern related to the merits of our proposed repurposing of portions of our property from office to residential. Rather, the stated reason was in order to allow a further discussion of neighborhood traffic with representatives of other town agencies. Our neighbors are concerned about existing street congestion on Glenville Street and Glenville Road, and the Commission chose to demonstrate to our neighbors that their concern about traffic did not fall on deaf ears. To be clear, at the risk of repeating what's been said at both prior meetings, our application, if approved, would not be expected to exacerbate existing traffic. Quite the contrary. it would be expected to ameliorate that traffic. 33 apartments on the east parcel, the Pemberwick side, will generate less traffic than the stabilized office building we hope to repurpose. And 36 apartments on the west parcel, the Glenville Street side, will generate less traffic than the stabilized office building we hope to repurpose on that side. Everyone in the room understands that. Our traffic engineer confirms that, and the Commission's traffic consultant agrees. Try as some might to link the merits of our application to the existing traffic on the street, that link points to only one possible result. This application should be approved rather than force us to seek to fill our office space with medical practices or co-working uses, both of which, to be sure, are the most likely office tenants in today's market. So what's changed since 2 weeks ago? For one, we formally submitted the revised drawings that we presented on November 20th and that seemed to be favorably received both by the Commission and our River Run neighbors, widening the turning radius at the west parcel traffic circle and adding rumble strips to slow down and keep in line those turning into and out of the internal road at that circle. Second, we attended a meeting with our neighbors and the assistant town planner and representatives of DPW and traffic operations. We were advised that although there is little the town agencies can do near term other than study traffic flows and possibly police and/or remove parking from the Glenville-Pemberwick corridor, we were also advised that we, the mill owners company, can put a "Do Not Block the Driveway" sign on our property on Glenville Street in an effort to prevent stop traffic from blocking our driveway that we share with River Run. This was consistent with the recommendation of our traffic consultant that we submitted to the Commission 2 weeks ago. As you might imagine, we're happy to do that. Third, and this might actually surprise you a little bit, as it surprised me. You might recall that one of the neighbors at the meeting 2 weeks ago talked about the left-hand turn out of the driveway onto Glenville Street and just how long it can take, and having waited for a long time. And I remember some of you didn't appreciate the fact that our attorney took that neighbor a little bit to task and say it probably wasn't nearly as long as you thought. Well, we decided to do our own limited study of the Glenville Street exit from our property. On 3 separate weekday mornings in the last week, during the morning rush hour, I tested the time it took to make a left turn out of our driveway onto Glenville Street. My findings were actually pleasantly surprising. On Tuesday, November 27th, between 7:46 and 8:48 a.m., I completed 11 left-hand turns. On Thursday, November 29th, between 7:42 and 8:45, I completed 14 left-hand turns. And on Monday, December 3rd, between 8:27 and between 8:27 and 9:10, I completed 10 left-hand turns. A total of 35 morning rush hour left-hand turns. My testing methodology was simple. Pull up to the stop sign at the foot of our driveway, hit start on my stopwatch, and hit stop at the point where I turned and was in the far lane. The average waiting time on those 35 turns was 13.3 seconds. More meaningful statistically, the median waiting time was 6 seconds, indicating that the average was skewed by a few longer than normal waits. But the longest wait I experienced over the 35 turns was still only 70 seconds. And I should note, in none of the 35 times that I approached and waited at the stop sign was there a single vehicle behind me. just to understand how I filled the time. After making each turn, I drove to the Stop and Shop and turned around to come back to our property, at which point I generally sat for a few minutes catching up on emails or phone calls. In 2 instances, I dropped off dry cleaning and picked up groceries. In short, over 3 separate rush hour weekday mornings, I made 35 left-hand turns and experienced a median wait time of 6 seconds. So here we are. Our application awaits a decision. We once again ask that both the Commission and our neighbors view this proposal for what it really is. It's a proposal to substitute residential for office. Lower traffic substituted for higher traffic. It's redevelopment, it's not development, and it's entirely consistent with the overall stated goals of the town. As we asked 5 weeks ago and as we asked again 2 weeks ago, we hope you will agree that our plan as proposed will result in the mill and its park-like setting being updated, improved, and revitalized with vibrancy and dynamism to the ultimate benefit of the entire neighborhood. We respectfully ask that you approve our application tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Schechter, I'm just going to do one clarification for the record. Somewhere you say that the conversion will be less traffic than existing conditions. I think what needs to be added to that is existing conditions at full office.
Yes.
Because right now your office utilization makes for very low traffic.
Yes.
So once you convert, there will be more traffic than at present.
Yes.
It's just that
A lot more.
if you had full office, it would be even more. And I just want to make sure that that's on the record in case.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, it's not absolutely empty right now.
But from what I understand, the 1881 building is empty and you have
Yes.
35% occupancy in the other building?
Something like that.
Yeah, so if you had 100% occupancy, you would have a lot more traffic
Yes.
there with what you're allowed to do at present than will occur once you've done
Yes,
it.
all of the traffic comments and all of the traffic
Yeah,
studies
have said
are
that.
based on presumed stabilized office.
Exactly, office use. I just want to make sure that that was on the record so that you're not quoted as having said there was no increase. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Tessie, do you want to say anything?
Mr. Schechter, if the Clomar doesn't come through, do you have a plan B for the lower level apartments?
I'm sorry.
If you don't
If
get
the Clomar doesn't come through, do you have a plan B for the lower level apartments? You're
Oh,
just not gonna
if
put
the
them-
Lomar, if
Yeah.
the Lomar doesn't come through, we're not sure what we're going to do. Obviously, that level remains a garage.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't.
The short answer is, the Lomar, let me answer it this way. Thought I wasn't going to speak. Yes, John Tessie, although Mr. Schechter didn't say I was here. I'm willing to say my friend, Mr. Granoff, is also here, our architect, so he can maybe chime in on the point. We believe it's a minimal risk. Mr. Macri, that's why we've asked, that we're happy to we're content with it being a condition. Understanding that if it's not satisfied, we'd have to start over again. And the Lomar, in theory, could be approved
separately.
Well, no, I'm saying the Lomar could be approved in part. We don't know what would happen.
Right, so but
So
bottom
it could
line
very
is-
well be that it's okay at a certain location, but not at another. For instance, it could be okay at that building site on the east side, and we may decide that we'll deal with the other building separately. We believe that would be a worst case. We don't see us 100% denied, so that's why we can't absolutely say, as Mr. Schechter stated. But we're willing to take that risk, and we'll come back to you on the basis, if that does happen, on the basis of what FEMA would allow, and it could be some mix.
Okay, so we will
We'll have to see.
condition that,
Yeah, we're happy with that condition. We'll take that risk.
as well as all the signage that's been agreed to and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Stephen, Eric have showed their true colors. They were more than happy to meet with Katie and the neighbors, and as we said, right along, they're very much part of the fabric of Glenville and intend to be there for a long, long time. So I think this is a win-win-win for everyone here. Thank you.
Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak? No? Okay. What about commission? Anybody have any more questions?
I would like to say one thing for the record, that I would express our appreciation to Mr. Schechner about meeting with the neighbors again and the town and being as cooperative as he has on one level. And on a second level, I'm impressed that you took the time to come in with your lawyer, but to present yourself and your own plan. We've asked that of other applicants, and you've been able to articulate what you have in mind, your vision, where you stand as the real applicant, so to speak. So we appreciate your time and effort on that point.
I'd just like to comment that I do appreciate that the existing congestion is beyond the scope of this application. But I think that it's a very significant community concern going forward, regardless of what goes on in your site. And we would hope and encourage any efforts of the community to talk about this and see if the town couldn't be motivated to work on some of these intersections to alleviate the problem, because it's not going away. I come down Riversville Road in the morning when it's when the school buses are out, and it took me 5 minutes this past week to go from my house out beyond ShopRite, because it could get really backed up. So appreciate the fact it wasn't bad coming out of your driveway, but it's just bad coming out of my driveway. So nonetheless, it's a problem for the town, and we encourage people in the Glenville area to continue to try to work with the town and get their interest in doing something about the congestion.
I guess everybody's sitting down, but, so I'm not sure who I'm addressing. I'm addressing Mr. Tessie. I would like to, I raised this question yesterday. The commission members would want to wait on this, but since Beta thought that there might be too much parking available on the west side, if once the use is established and everything's done, if it ever does look like there is too much parking and the applicant is willing to consider reverting to green space in that for some of that parking.
So, Mike?
Yeah.
I think Mr. Schachter.
Yeah, I know that, but I wanted to make you stand up.
Salute.
So it's really just a request that they think about it down the road, but the commission members yesterday felt like if the parking was available, it would end up getting used by somebody sometime, and that seemed a very fair point, but I always like green stuff better, so.
We like green stuff also. There's no question that we are overparked as residential on the west parcel. In fact, several years ago when we repaved, we were asked by our neighbors at River Run to please not restripe the upper parking lot, because it made the approach to their upper two buildings feel less commercial by having it, unstriped. And we respected that request. We understood.
They used some of your, from what I understood the day I was there, they used some of your extra parking right now.
Well, every cloud has a silver lining, and our vacancy has been a parking boon
for them
to River Run. But I'm actually talking about the last parking that's used, even on a full site, even on a fully stabilized site. we've left unstriped, so that the only time that it's likely to be used in our expectation, but it remains to be seen, is when people have parties and people have guests and things like that. I think that our preference with regard to that extra parking is to leave it that we've always dealt with it in the best interest of our shared property, and that
Okay.
happy to look at it again in the future.
We'll put that in and, who knows? Okay, so folks, are you ready to close?
Yep. Yes.
Mrs. Goss? Okay, so we've closed. And let's go to the next application, which is number 11, 105 Prospect LLC.
Good evening, everyone. Christopher Bristol, representing the applicant, Greenwich 105 Prospect LLC. I have the old-fashioned boards. I don't know if there's anything up on the screen. We're just down the street here on Prospect Street in the GB zone, as is somewhat common in the center of town. It's a smaller lot developed as a residence back in 1930s. Prior to zoning, and since then the tide of commercial zones have swept over and made it into the GB zone. In 1983, there was a site plan that approved a youth shelter use for the property and found that 6 spaces were appropriate for that use at the time. Excuse me. It's vacant now, but that was the most recently approved use. What I wanted to point out about the building is this: the building slopes down, or the property slopes down from west to east, such that, this is important, the basement ends up counting under current regulations as a story above grade. Because it counts as a story above grade, even though will be used. I'm happy to accept a condition in this. It'll be used as storage, but because it counts as a story above grade, I had to count it as floor area, and I also had to assign it a use, because you can't have a story that has no use technically. So that's why the proposed office floor area numbers were a little bit larger than functionally they will be. So as proposed, the first floor is going to be a small office, as shown on the floor plans. The second floor is going to be a one residential unit with 2 bedrooms. And I know the plans are mislabeled. It says 2 and 3 bedrooms, but it's just a 2-bedroom on the top floor. The basement, or lower level, as I should say, technically, again, is a story above grade. However, the head height in there makes it, for practical purposes, really not usable for much. It's about 6.5 feet down there, so it's not really good for anything else other than storage, and that's all it will be used. But it will be used in storage in connection with the business on the first floor. You'll see on the proposed basement plan, there's washers and dryers there. It's an open space, but again, there's no office, active office use proposed for that. Insofar as parking is concerned, you notice if you know the property, it actually has a narrow driveway that goes back into a parking area, but the parking area is shared with another property in the back. There's another commercial building to the back. There's the family center, which is another commercial building over to the north. There's a house to the south. So it's an existing unstriped parking area, which I guess based upon the previous site plan could fit technically 6 cars. Rocco V. Giandria proposed different spaces, slightly the same, but striped them according to DPW code, and also included an ADA space, because part of what we're doing, we're intending to be more ADA compliant. So we have proposing an ADA space there, and also there's a stair tower, exterior stair tower, over in this corner of the building that's being removed and replaced with a ADA lift to get from the lower level up to the first floor and then enter the space. So we're not building anything to take away parking. However, due to the restriping, it's going from 6 spaces and no ADA spaces to 4 + 1 ADA space. So in that way, we're not really changing anything other than the striping, unfortunately. So when you look at the, when you look at the existing parking, I understand that the site plan 1983 requires 6 spaces and found that compliant. However, I'd argue that the calculation of parking back then is not what it is now. The way I looked at it when I was looking at this project was because we have to count the lower level as a story. So therefore, you have about 3,600 square feet of existing floor area. If I were to build a youth shelter building today, I would expect parking to fall under the catch-all under 6150, under 6158, which is the 1 per 250 square feet of usable space. And if that's the case, then the building, under today's regulations, would require 11 or 12 spaces. As proposed, well, we have, depending if you count the basement or not, if we're all in and we count the basement as office, even though it's technically going to be used as storage, we come up with a parking of 12 to 13 spaces. So we're very close the way I looked at it. And we also, in terms of the small office on the first floor,
So let me, 'cause
proposed
Katie-
and existing.
Katie had to step out during the meeting, during the briefing yesterday. So, and I would really love to get your head around this. So it was a youth shelter. It was, a youth shelter.
Correct.
So what they want to do now is they want to convert it to a combination of residential for, I'm just going to call it 900 square feet. And then they have another 1,900 square feet of FAR, which in the original application was called office. Then Mr. Bristol wrote an email today where he said, it can't really be all counted as office because we have to include in the FAR, we have to include about 600 square feet of basement, which can't really be called part of the office and would be storage. And the reason all that matters is because they only have maybe.
So that brings it down to 1,300?
Exactly.
So if you go with that math?
Well, I was going a little, my areas were a little bit different. I was going by the.
His
But
math,
that's the
his
concept.
math in
That's
the
the
email
concept.
is 1,333 square feet of office.
Correct.
Yeah, I know.
1353, yeah, correct.
Yeah, I knew, and I knew when I subtracted the 600 that I was getting to 1,350. Okay, roughly?
Yes, yes.
Okay, roughly. I said 1,900, just to round. The problem is that they have 5 parking spaces. They have right now, a 3-bedroom apartment upstairs.
2.
It's marked on the plans as a 3-bedroom apartment at this moment, what we have from them. They have 5 parking spaces, and they have 1,300 square feet of office. So that would be, they need 6 spaces for the office, and they need at least 1 space for the apartment, so they're back to being underparked. So, and that's excluding the basement, which they're saying they would use as storage. I can't see a way, they're saying they come close to meeting the regulations, but that, I don't think that floats our boat. We want them to meet the regulations, and I can't see a way of doing this so it meets the regulations, and I'm stuck.
Well, one question that I was going to ask is, what about the employee density? So would you
that they would-
restrict
they
yourself
would
to
restrict
7
themselves, yes.
employees?
They'd restrict themselves to 5. They've offered
Which is
that already.
4 spaces times 1.2.
Yeah, because it's 1.2. So four would be for the employees and 2 would be for the residences. So you would.
They only have 5 parking spaces, so we would need to restrict them to 5 employees, which they've agreed to do.
Oh, okay.
And to use the basement as storage.
Correct.
Now, so what then, if you would be willing to do that, what I would suggest to you is do the floor plan right. Because you've got 3 bedrooms here.
It's actually mislabeled. If you count the bedrooms, there's only 2. I understand. But
Okay.
that's fine.
just do it
We'll
right.
correct whatever needs to be corrected.
Because Mr. Feminella has not had a chance to review the flow data. And where normally we might be okay with that, the problem is that we're talking Horseneck, and you know on Horseneck Sewer, because we have held people to the standard that Feminella has to agree with it, we're going to apply that consistently to any applicant that's coming in on Horseneck.
That I understand. I
Okay,
understand.
so once Feminella has reviewed this, I would love it if you didn't come back on the 18th of December.
For something it's so easy.
I know, but we're going to be so tired. But if you would fix your floor plans, get Feminella's input, and give us the condition in the application when you redo this, that you will, the basement is storage only.
Correct.
That you'll stay with the 1.2, and can you stripe that parking?
No, it's proposed to be striped, but and that's the problem, is that under the previous site plan, it was shown as 6, but I think the dimensions changed since
does that
1983.
work?
And we're adding the ADA space, which makes it,
That work for you?
So it's correct plans to update the uses?
Number of
Yeah, it's
bedrooms.
correct the plans for the number of bedrooms, and also that in the basement, they have to show it as storage. And I'm kind of uncomfortable with what that full-size kitchen is on the first floor plan.
Call it kitchenette.
I don't know, are you allowed to have an office with 5 people in a full-size kitchen?
What do you need the full-size kitchen
Because
for?
it's largely
They
for
have
the
all
building
this
owner, so
space.
he's going to spend some time in there.
But he's got
it's
a
not-
kitchen on the second floor, too.
For the resident, well, it's not. It's not for his residence. The whole point of having the second floor as a residence is to really mitigate the parking, which we knew was going to be an issue. So it's not intended to be sort of him live there and then, but
So why don't you do 6110 there? Why doesn't he do a 6110? That, to me, is the greatest solution you could have for
Well,
this.
there's no waiver of parking under 6110.
But he could have enough parking.
Well, then
It
he
seems
would
a
need,
really
then he would
marginal
need
benefit.
2 units, which kind of makes it worse.
But he could do 6, he wants to have his office downstairs.
in the first, yes, but.
So his office is the requirement.
Yes. Well, I mean, we were just, again, this is a small project. I see it as a marginal benefit, and in terms of,
But you still have to meet the regulations, whether it's big or small.
I feel like we're coming close to that anyway.
Oh, closest doesn't count, okay?
Well,
Right? Big project, small project, we meet the regulations.
What I would be asking is that the reason why I pointed out my thinking on the existing parking demand and the conditions and everything else would be asking the commission to waive the parking, or modify the parking requirements by.
No.
Why do you need that, though? The way
You
you
don't
spelled
need
it out
that.
previously.
Well, then why do I
works.
need the 110G?
I was
No,
just throwing it out there
yeah,
because he
it's-
doesn't know what he's going to do with all that space. Why doesn't he rent it out?
I'll discuss it with him between now and then.
Yeah,
Or an
okay.
affordable unit.
But make it comply with the regulations, because otherwise somebody like John Hegney or Mr. Tessie or Mr. Bristol comes in and quotes the thing we approved that didn't meet the regulations, and I don't want to do that, okay?
Sure.
Right?
Yes. Hey.
Right, Mrs. Goss?
Completely agree.
She's my lawyer. Okay.
Okay, so just to make sure I got this right, you correct the plan to update the uses in the number of bedrooms, storage in the basement?
Yes.
DPW sewers, comment on the flows?
Correct.
What was it on the parking, 1.2?
1.2, but they're going to come back. He's going to tell
Well,
us that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm trying to figure this out, so I get it all written down. What else would you want? There was something else.
Conservation.
And take a look at the kitchen, and the striping of the parking,
Striping parking?
which is what's proposed.
Correct.
The problem is, yeah, because right now, you've only got 2 offices. And if you're going to have 5 employees, 4 employees, what was it, 1.2 gives us
Times
4
4,
employees.
it would be
You
5.8.
can make a 3rd office, and there you go.
Oh, no, 4.8. 5.
Yeah. So just make the math work and make it comply.
Okay.
See you in 2 weeks?
Yes?
I don't think this parking works. Parking space you have at an angle is pretty, Carl, I don't really think it works.
The previous site plan actually had a bit of a worse configuration. I mean, again,
I think you
we
could,
probably can have different,
if you can find out from the person who uses the right-of-way, if they wouldn't mind allowing you to park there.
No,
And it just-
definitely, it's a well-used right. If you probably haven't seen the site, but
No, well, I
you really
have.
to go down it in order to access the other parking lot, which is in front of the buildings behind us. So
So people use it?
Yeah, certainly.
People do use it?
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, okay.
It's, so if you go in back of this building, it's actually
But
like a
you
little
could
canyon.
just, how many parking spaces can you get if you just stack them all the way across here?
I mean, the previous site plan showed 6 at a bit different angles. I mean, functionally,
Can you get 6 in the back there and then 1 up front?
I guess
So there's
it
7?
depends how much we comply with DPW, the widths and lengths of the spaces. I mean, I'll talk to DeAndre about it and see if we can come up with something.
All across here and 1 there.
I mean, then we also have an ADA space which requires greater width, which is.
Put that there.
Bottom line, it's owner occupied the office supposedly at this point, but you are right that if he ever sells the building, the parking should work for whoever buys it, and maybe it won't be owner occupied anymore, so
And
try to make
although
it
it's
work.
part of the regulations, the density, all the conditions will be laid out very neatly in
Yeah.
what
So you know what you gotta do,
anticipated to be approval.
and I'm gonna take a class in this. Okay,
Anything else?
that's it. Katie, do you have any discussion items?
What do you want, are you going to, do you want to take a vote first?
We're gonna,
'Cause I do have one, but.
Nothing for the public hearing, we can close the
Correct,
public hearing.
yes.
Okay, the public hearing is now closed, and I lied, it's only 10:30.
But after you want to do all of that, I do have one that you may want to take up now, or we could discuss it some other time on the fee schedule. Just wanted to give everybody an
I think we gotta
update.
wait for Hardman, because he's the one who was so interested in the fee schedule.
Right, I don't have, it's not a vote on it, it's just an update on.
Oh, okay.
On that, so that's all I wanted
Okay.
to give you, I could do it later. Sorry?
Eastern Middle School.
Eastern Middle we gotta do.
Right, so we can do all of that after.
Yeah, and let people go.
After we do the public hearing items.
Okay, so we only have one thing to do, which is amazingly enough, because we've left, oh yeah, I forgot to say that, but I guess it was clear that 105 Prospect is open. On Mill Owners LLC, we've closed the item. Is everybody ready to make a decision tonight?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Therefore, does anybody want to have discussion before we entertain a motion? Victoria's shaking her head. Mr. Levy, do you have anything you would like to discuss? You're good?
Nope.
Mr. Yeski's good? Mr. McRae?
I'm good.
Okay, therefore, we will entertain a motion.
An application of Mill Owners Group LLC, PLPZ 2018-00403 and 404 for final site plan and special permit, add 69 dwelling units to the mill, as well as site modifications to improve flood resiliency, balconies, terraces to some of the proposed dwelling units, and other site improvements located at 10 Glenville Street, 32 Pembroke Road, 340 Pembroke Road in the LBHO zone. Motion to approve said application with conditions that conservation letter dated 10/23/18 notes planting plans for the east and west sides are not wholly consistent with the planting approved by the Wetlands Agency. It is recommended that the plans submitted to P&Z should be revised and correspond to the plans entitled Additional Lawn Edge Plantings Wetland Mitigation Plan dated this September 27th, 2018, and annotated site plan detail SK1 dated September 20th, 2018, prepared by J. Fain and Associates, part of the wetlands application record for 2018-082, which is their file number. The applicant is going to reconfigure the first turn in the driveway to provide better maneuvering for vehicles at that location. The applicant should provide site directional and traffic signage for the project site on a plan submitted to staff. One for discussion, applicants should return to the commission if results of the FLOMAR do not provide for full number of proposed units, or should that go to staff?
I
No, it should come to us. If the Lomar isn't done, if the Lomar isn't approved, they said they would come back to us, and they should.
Yeah, they would have to, because at that point,
Yes.
they have, it's a revision.
Revision of the
Like,
approved
even-
site plan.
Even in part, so if they get half of
Yeah.
it.
Well, if it just stays, let me ask you this, if that area just stays as it is existing, then there's nothing to say. But if they're doing any sort of change of that area, then it would come back to the
They
commission.
only approve half of the units. Why should it come back to us?
Of who approves half of the units? But- No, that's,
only-
if there's any sort of change to the plan that you have as a result of that, it would need to come back.
Right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I got what you're saying, Peter.
Okay. Some whereases, the applicant has met with neighbors to discuss surrounding traffic issues. It was noted that the property owner had presented the project on 2 occasions. Whereas the Glenville traffic has increased over time, DPW is studying the traffic issue to develop a plan for easing that congestion. Anything else from the members?
Yes, to note that the HDC unanimously approved this proposal to convert, recommended that they unanimously approved it, and they rendered an advisory opinion to Planning and Zoning following their own approval. I'm looking quickly.
I've got it.
Okay. And then the ARC had made some comments which the applicant has incorporated, and regarding the private patios, the walkway, and the planting beds. I believe they are they have submitted the lighting and photometric plans, as well as the survey information, which was requested by ARC. So we did ARC, we did conservation, wetlands. The ZEO has opined favorably, had only requested that the parking be clarified, and that's been done. I can't think of anything else.
I think the other thing is, although the applicant made it clear they were not willing to do a permanent easement, they did say that they would not object to allowing people on their property as part of the Glenville plan walking path, although it's understood that would not be in the form of a permanent easement.
And then pursuant to the beta comments, the applicant agreed to consider down the road potentially reducing the number of parking spaces on the west partial should it turn out to be surplus, because I won't let go of that one. You know how people get. I believe.
Not the thing about the not block the driveway sign, right?
Yes, I think you got the not block the driveway, right?
I think it was actually under site directional and traffic signage to be indicated on a plan for staff review. Would included in that, or do you want specific on the not block driveway?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Well, it's up to you.
So I found it. So, yeah.
You got the HTC comments?
Yeah, I'm just going through them one more time. It's just all the comments that they made. And I think if we say that any outstanding comments will be addressed, because it's been a while since I've gone through this. This is July. They've been doing this for a long time.
Is there a reason to make any mention of the external traffic conditions and that
I think it's worth noting what we've said to pursuant to that whereas we recognize that there may be some congestion in Glenville, that the commission notes that this proposal will generate less parking when at full capacity than the existing office use when at full capacity.
There you go.
That's a whereas.
Whereas,
That's a whereas.
I guess. I'm always fuzzy on whereas.
No, that's,
Well, I asked
okay.
you about that. so
Yeah,
it
I know.
sounded good. It
I
sounds
make
good.
it up.
It's not a condition on it.
Whereas it's just, yeah, it's
Just a
noting
whereas.
that
It's just a note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But findings and whereases,
Yeah,
like
well,
we
there's-
find this and we whereas that.
Also about,
Okay.
maybe another whereas might be that, that only the town can help with the congestion.
Yeah. We just have to be very careful how
at
that
the
gets worded.
Intersections and
Yeah,
the
I
flow
think that's
through
right.
it.
That's not the applicant's
That's not
responsibility.
their
We-
burden, yeah.
Right, so that, but
Yeah.
maybe we should actually say something like
I think that's a good thing to say,
Yeah,
that
you can put it in the whereas clause that,
whereas, yeah,
that's part of the town's plan.
POCD or no?
No, they have a
Not that
CMAQ
it-
grant already.
Right, okay.
And that's in the works.
but that it is not the applicant's responsibility to address off-site congestion.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
I
I
would say
mean,
address, I would say, because we do address off-site.
Okay, correct.
yeah, especially because it is a special permit. They do
Yeah.
have off-site impacts that
Right.
you've said.
We've opined on.
Yeah.
So I think Victoria's right, then we would
Yeah.
use, right,
A different- yeah.
correct. And then, yes, that's a good point, Nick. You are moving both the site plan and the special permit right now.
Yes.
We can hear.
Okay. So is that it?
I believe that's it.
Okay.
Second.
There you go.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, that's because I didn't.
Okay, so if the commission would like to, would you like to take a vote to discuss two discussion items that were not listed on the agenda? One would be an update for the fee schedule, and the other would be the Eastern Middle School, which has gone before the Architectural Review Committee.
Nick's ready to roll on the
Okay.
EMS, so we can just do that one, and then we can talk about the fees. Nick, are you ready? By the way, I looked up on the high school, I saw that the ARC actually went with the gray. Did you see that?
No.
Sure. We're doing the white, but they did the gray.
I can tell you about 1,000 years ago with, sitting with Ken Deck at numerous ARC meetings, we did kind of look at Central Middle School.
Bye-bye.
So we got to take a vote to open up those discussion items.
Okay, I hereby ask for someone to move that we open up those discussion
I
items.
move to open discussion items for reviewing and discussing new and revised fee schedules and exterior alterations to Eastern Middle School as proposed by Board of Education.
Second.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
Okay,
You can move, Fred.
start with Eastern Middle School. The Board of Education has asked us to opine on curtain wall revisions to the Eastern Middle School building. They have provided us with a number of samples and options. At the moment, before us is a option C, white spandrel.
Mr. Macker, if I may just give a tiny bit of background on this. So this proposal had gone before the Architectural Review Committee, and due to the timing of the need for them to move forward and the timing of the ARC meetings, the applicant asked to come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. As you know, the Architecture Review Committee is advisory to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was noted on a noticed meeting that the commission held last Monday, amongst other things on that agenda, and discussion was held at that time. Thank you.
Okay, Antonassi Associates, working for Board of Education, has provided has samples, specifications, and a drawing showing the proposed facade changes. The facade changes include spandrel glass, fixed glass, egress windows, venting windows, and doors. In addition, spandrel panels in lower areas and louvers for HVAC systems internal of the curtain wall. The reference drawing from Antonazzi Associates, option C, white spandrel, dated the 3rd of December 2018, shows windows and door frames to be clear anodized aluminum. The spandrel glass to be spandrel panels to be clear anodized aluminum, and the spandrel glass to be Guardian Glass, SunGuard SN68, double glazed low E clear glass with a white frit on surface 4, which is the internal surface of the spandrel. This is all included on that option C white spandrel drawing of the same date.
Okay? Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Aye.
Fee schedule.
Fee schedule.
So as you know, at this time of year, we always look at our fee schedule, and usually what we do is a 2% increase is the norm. We didn't do an increase in the recession years, and we've now, in the last couple of years, been doing the increase. And in the discussions that have come up amongst the commission when we've brought this up before, there is a concept that was presented that would increase the fees for the larger applications and decrease the fees for the smaller applications that we want to help promote in the community, things like accessory apartments, new signage for when someone's going into a business so they're not burdened by a large fee to start their business, things like that. In the discussion, it was stated that Dave Hardman would work with me directly, and then we would present back to the commission. When I had done what I just said, and I had prepared a draft for him to review, and when I presented it to him, he had come back, and his comment was he was more thinking of doing something along the lines of the zoning permit and building permit fee schedule, and those work where you have a certain dollar amount per square footage, and so as the square footage increases, the fee increases, and the fees can get substantial. The problem with doing something like that is it will require considerable research to have that be defendable. So I'm happy to do it, but that's not something that we can do within the time period of next meeting, as an example. So my question is, would you like me to just do the standard 2%, which I think is the appropriate thing to do at this point, and then look more in depth into what this, a really big undertaking of changing how we do our fee schedule. If you recall, we did this exact same thing 3 or 4 years ago with how we do the zoning permit fees, and we had done a lot of research to that end, and that was moved forward. So doing something like that for this fee schedule would be similar.
Okay.
So
The only thing that we've said since then is our sign fee too high, so it discourages people from complying? And should we just bring it down so that it's easy? And I believe you raised that.
So it'd be sign fee and accessory apartment fees would go in the other direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would, I mean, and then we'll look at whether or not we can.
So there's, yeah, for an accessory and $750 for a new sign.
And so, like, you're gonna put a little sign
It's pretty
up.
substantial.
It's pretty substantial amount of money, so you say screw it, and you put up whatever and you don't pay. So we would rather have you do a nice sign and make less money on it, I think.
Okay, are we proposing what that?
No, what I propose to do is draft something up and then present it to you for the next meeting.
And Katie had said, what if we drop the sign from $750 to $450? Was
Right.
to make it the same as an accessory apartment. We weren't sure that was enough, but it's a start. I mean, I don't think we're gonna fix the compliance issue, but it's just like to do a gesture of trying to be helpful.
So I think to me, it's that issue. Here's the signage application, fill this out, you have to go to a meeting, and then you spend $100.
Right.
You guys can walk away, thank you very much. Like you said.
Yeah.
Now, one interesting thing in terms of the special permit fee, since as you know, now we do a lot of the things that have been the special exception. The special exception fee is $250, so I think that's an automatic add-in to the special permit. So that's defensible because that was a fee that one would have to pay before.
Yeah, totally defensible.
Yeah.
And I just want to understand, so if you want to fill out an application, you have to write out a check to fill out the application. You don't get the approval until you give the check.
Well, we won't even process your application without the check.
And then you still
If-
have
if
to
you-
go to ARC.
If you gave me a napkin sketch and a check, you can go to the commission.
No, I
But,
mean for signs, I think he's on signs.
okay, anything though, we won't process anything without a check.
The approval is contingent on you paying the check. Does that help anybody?
No, we won't even move you past go unless you give us a check. Yeah.
This is cheating a little bit, but the ARC had talked about having a dedicated sign committee.
Mhm.
What would you guys think of having a non-ARC person on it? Somebody who is interested in signs?
Well, the membership of the ARC does a lot for a person who is not necessarily an architect or a designer. So that there's a slot, so to speak, on the ARC for just, a regular old person. So we've had people that have,
Non-member by what? Like, what do you mean by non-member? Like,
You could be on the ARC and not have the background that the rest of them have.
yes, so that's already accounted for on the ARC.
So we could have a non-ARC person, I'm asking a sort of different question. What if we brought in, like, just an interested person?
Yeah,
somebody
one. Right.
somebody who's not on the ARC but would be on a sign committee.
No, 'cause there's just one ARC, and if they do a subcommittee, that's fine, but yeah, there's only one ARC.
If there's only one ARC, there would be a separate sign committee with a separate membership.
No, I don't think that, no.
Okay, that's what I was asking, if we
Right.
could bring in somebody to just help with the sign issues right
Right.
now.
To use a phrase from somebody we know, corralling cats.
Yeah.
Herding cats, that's what herding cats would be defined as.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think most people would, I don't think people who aren't in the business enjoy being on the ARC. Okay, so,
Okay.
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, so I'll come back with minor adjustments to the fee schedule for the 18th, and then we'll commit to doing a full deep dive. So it'll effectively require, it's very difficult, actually, because we don't get charged on our legal ad by application, so we can't necessarily track application X cost so much money for their legal ad, because we just get charged for the total legal ad. So obviously, on the aggregate, we can figure out how many, they're all special permit applications, so we can figure out on the aggregate how much we spend on legal ads a year and how many applications we have, so we can back into it that way, and staff time, et cetera.
It's just an open account, and it's, still doesn't look.
Right, right. And so what we'd also have to take a look at, when an application comes in, how many hands are touching it on our side, and then we send it out, obviously, to get comments from other departments, so how many hours are spent there. So we really have to be able to document this.
And I'm not sure